me just briefly introduce our first speaker and and his moderator. Marcus Hartung is a guy who I think to anyone who follows our industry needs very little introduction, but let me provide a little one. He is one of those people in the academy who has really sort of bridged the divide between the marketplace and the academy. And I think it's fair to say, Marcus, that you have focused on, sort of ways of narrowing that divide in a very, thoughtful yet very practical kind of a way. Marcus was a small firm lawyer. He's been a mediator. He's been a large firm partner and managing partner. He's an international speaker. He is the author of a great book. Give a plug, Marcus. Come on. Come on.
I wanted to do it later.
Oh, you'll do it later. Okay, good. That has a new international edition coming out. He speaks around the world, and he always speaks and thinks very thoughtfully. Leslie is going to be his moderator. I'm sure that everyone in the Northwestern community knows her well. She is the one person who, in a first meeting I had, absolutely almost left me speechless, but I have great respect for what she's doing. She's taking the lead on a very innovative program here at Northwestern that I think is important not just in the States, but I think globally in terms of what Leslie is trying to do. Essentially finding, I think, is this fair, Leslie, trying to sort of really tap into people with STEM backgrounds. And sort of really leveraging that background to make an impact in terms of the new legal services industry. And so she's doing a great job, and I think she's a great person to pair with Marcus. So without further ado, Marcus, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Don't forget to tweet all this, please.
You never forget that.
We had a good. I think we had a good outcome yesterday with more than 100 tweets. Yeah. Right. Good morning. I'm going to speak about 4 topics, basically 4 topics. This is, the title of this is Surviving in Tough Times, People, Technology, Innovation. So I'm going to speak about 4 topics. One is tough times. So are we really living in tough times, and from what perspective you would like to judge on this? And then we talk briefly about people, then technology, and then innovation. And as a sort of health warning, this is coming from a more or less German background. So please, always with a pinch of salt, what I say may not apply to this wonderful country or to any of these 50 wonderful countries. Bear in mind, there is another world out there where things are just different, although we are talking about a global issue. Let's start. Are we living in tough times? Is it really the case that we live in tough times? And is it tough for lawyers? Is it tough for in-house legal departments, for companies, for students, for I don't know what? And how do we look at it? And what are the data and criteria we want to take to place our judgment on? Let's start with the Georgetown report. I'm sure you all know the Georgetown report, and in case not, I would encourage you to go to the internet and download the yearly Georgetown report, because it is a great piece of work providing all sorts of data on the legal profession. And for this year, or for last year, it has a certain pessimistic stance. If you read it, you think, oh my God, why did I choose this profession? So what does the Georgetown report say? It's really tough because the demand is flat since 2010. A bit better for the MLaw 100, but overall it's flat. No growth. Productivity, Georgetown reports understands productivity by the number of billed hours. On a downward scale, law firm increase their rates year on year, but the realization on rates is on a downward scale. Expenses are up, profit margin is down. This report is headlined "The Lure of Failing Strategies," and interestingly, Georgetown compares that what law firms are doing by means of setting up a new strategy to find new growth and a safe place for the next 3 to 5 years. Georgetown report compares it with the French efforts following the First World War, before the Second World War, when they built up the Ligne Maginot. I'm sure you all know what it is. It was a defense line at the border to Germany. You know, France and Germany have not always been best friends, and in First World War in particular, and France erected this defense line expecting that a next war, no one knew that the Second World War would come, and that was at a time when world wars didn't carry any numbers. You know, you had this war from 14 to 18, and France thought, with this Maginot Line, we will keep the Germans away, they have to come via the Netherlands, and we will fight them there. And this Maginot Line consisted of stone, of just, you know, barriers, like closed doors. No one thought about airplanes at that time. And Georgetown says, if we look at the strategy of law firms, it reminds us very much to that what France did following the First World War, because they could only imagine that the next war would be an exact copy of the First War. They could not imagine that a second war would look different, with different stances, different attitudes, different weapons. So France defended itself for a continuing First World War. And Georgetown says that is exactly what's happening in the legal profession. As law firms look at the big financial crisis back in 2007, 2008, and prepare themselves for a second financial crisis. And they don't realize that the next crisis will be something completely different. So their defense strategy is the Maginot Line, and the Maginot Line didn't help at all. In 1941, Germany just ran over the Maginot Line and came with all their airplanes, with their Blitzkrieg, and the rest is history. No one is proud of that. It's just making my point, and that's what Georgetown says. So that seems to be the situation, according to the Georgetown report. Now, in Germany, I said Germany is different. We analyzed the performance of the top 30 German firms year on year. And why top 30? Because that is a group which doesn't show much change. It's always the same firms. They change places, but basically it's the same group. And we use indexed figures just to analyze growth, and we focus on 4 sets of data. Turnover, number of people, number of equity partner, productivity. Productivity by means of revenue per lawyer. And what is clearly to be seen is that since 2002, the performance of the German top 30 is growing and growing and growing. Of course, there was a dip during the financial crisis, that is in 2009. But since then, the performance is again growing. And it's not only growing on turnover, there are more people, there are more equity partner, and if you look at the green line is revenue per lawyer. It was sort of stagnating since 2007, 2008, but it's now higher than the pre-crisis revenue per lawyer. So tough times for top 30 companies. Maybe that's not the proper diagnosis. But you could say, okay, that's top 30. Like the MLaw 100, they are better off than other firms. So let's look at the so-called Mittelstandsfirms. Mittelstandsfirms are small to medium firms, not global, independent, no UK or US management, inflexible, not innovative, typical partnerships, and so on. So, in 3 words, a typical German law firm. But if you look at their performance and their revenue per lawyer, RPL growth, from last year, you see just growth. These law firms are growing. There are many reasons for it, why these law firms can improve their performance. But what I want to say is, to say it's tough is maybe not so, it's not so easy to say that. So what we did, away from Germany, back to the global scale, since 2007, we have looked at a certain group of law firms to see how they have changed their performance over the years. And this is we started on a McKinsey analysis. And at that time, the good old days in 2007, the legal market, global legal market, had 5 groups of law firms. Group A, the Wachtels and so, high premium, very profitable, transaction focused, you know, all what they do. Then on the Group E, the large firms, the Baker McKenzies of this world, DLA Piper, with a completely different strategy. Then you have the Group D, that was the Magic Circle, the English Magic Circle, plus Latham and Skadden. And then Group B and Group C, firms, you know all the names, with interesting decisions to be taken as regards to which way to choose for further growth. So that was our starting point. We translated that in a different picture now to see how these groups of firms have moved, and we had a certain thesis. We said the rich firms will be richer, the large firms will be larger, and the firms in the middle will come under severe pressure and will over time leave that segment. That was our assumption. So let's see whether we were right. In 2013, the picture hasn't changed that much. The rich firms are still unchanged, and the large firms have grown larger. And in the middle, it seems as if there would be a merger of Group B and Group C. So as a consequence of the financial crisis, many firms have said, come on, let's go to the Wachtel segment. Let's focus on premium client, premium work. Let's work on our profitability, increase our profit per partner. That was their strategy. Remember the Maginot line. To be away from any crisis because we are so premium. That was 2013. Now what happens in 2017? The Group E, the big firms, are even growing bigger, and the rich firms, look at Group A, where they are getting richer. But it seems that one part of our prediction has not been right, and that's the group in the middle, these Group B and C. So we thought, let's look closer to it. And we found out that if you look closer to this group of firms, our prediction is true because there is a group of firms, that is Group B, which is following the very profitable route up to the Cravath and Wachtel and Slaughter and Mayer, these types of firms. And there are some other firms, the Group C, these green dots, I don't know whether you can see that, they will over time probably leave that market. And that is the comparison from 2007 to 2017. What I want to say is that, of course, things have changed, but basically, that what the Georgetown report is saying is not yet true. It may become true in a couple of years, but at the moment, things haven't really changed. Other than the rich have been richer, the bigger have been bigger, and in the middle, well, that's normal. So what do these numbers tell us? We see in American Lawyer, in Legal Week, in The Lawyer, all these rankings, these profitability rankings. What do they tell us? Actually, nothing. Because in this group of what is known as legal market, some companies are missing because they are not taking into account alternative service providers, spin-offs, other types of service providers who do not fit into the structure of a pure partnership, traditional way of doing legal services. That's what Mark very often describes as how legal services have been delivered in the old days. So the traditional ways of looking at the successes of legal market and the successes of law firm are no longer helpful. But if you're a managing partner and you go to a consultant and want to have advice for how to further develop, what are the key points you should focus on? And these are maybe my point I would give to him: focus on people, focus on innovation, focus on technology, If I don't mention clients, that goes without saying. But the first point is, are we living in tough times? Actually, it depends a bit, and we don't know really. And this Georgetown report is a great piece to read, and I really do encourage you to do that. But don't think that this really reflects the market of legal service providers. There is only one exemption. That is this slide, also from a Thomson Reuters report. That shows how alternative service providers have taken over and how they have gained market share in the world. David, I'm surprised that you are taking a photo. I mean, this is your graph. Are you double checking whether I have changed something there? Rest assured, I didn't. But you know, the legal market is full of legal service providers who are not law firms. And they have huge market shares. And only some law firms are there with their captive, with their own LPOs, legal process outsourcing provider. But that's only a small bit. So these alternative service providers are active in the market, but they are not taken into account in the rankings of MLaw 100, 200, MLaw, you name it all. It seems to be two worlds where we look at. And therefore, we can say, is it tough or not? Right, that's it. Now, people, innovation, and technology, these are now sketches from our research we do at Bucerius Law School. People. Yesterday, we talked quite a lot about people and why people are so resistant to change, and lawyers in particular, and why it is so difficult to deal with law firms. Now, I have the privilege to work for Bucerius, and this is a copy from a magazine which dealt with Germany's top lawyers, and there was an article on Bucerius, and it was said, hier studieren die Besten, so the best students are here. And I don't comment on that. I think it's true. And we look at these people and see how their personality traits develop, and we interview them. Because we want to understand what drives them, what drives students to go to such a law firm, and to such a law school, and what are their future plans, how do they see life, what is important for them, what are their values. And we interview international students. Each year, from late summer to December, a large group of international students from universities all over the world come to Hamburg and study there. And I teach their management and leadership classes. And we interview them. We do surveys, and so just to better understand how this new generation of lawyers develops. And interestingly is that things seem to change. This is a graph showing our tradition, how we look at lawyers. That's the famous Larry Richards herding cats research. Have you heard of that? What makes it so different with lawyers? So he compared lawyers with the general public. And the general public on this graph is always 50. So with regard to skepticism, the assumption is 50% of the general population is very skeptical and 50% are not. That's his assumption. Then he compares personality traits of lawyers. So lawyers are very skeptical. I mean, that's part of their job. And they have a high sense for autonomy. That means don't even think of trying to manage me. You know, that means high sense for autonomy. They have a lack of resilience. Interestingly, lawyers who think they are great guys, they are not resilient. That means they are risk averse because they can't bounce back. They are not sociable. I mean, it's... And they have this sense of urgency. Of course, if you have a new assignment for a lawyer, what he does, he from A to B, give me my resources and then get out of my way, and he gets it done. That's a sense of urgency. Don't get in his way with admin stuff, like conflict check and the paperwork. Don't do that. So that is how we look at lawyers, and therefore we say it's impossible to manage law firms. It's like herding cats. Now we have looked at these young people, and the world looks different with these guys. Look, they are skeptic, but not to that extent from Larry's research with lawyers. They also have a high sense of urgency, but they are very sociable. Look at this. Look at these young people, how they perform against the traditional lawyers of these old days. And they have a high sense of resilience, and the international students even more so. Because what do? They leave their home country and their university and come to Hamburg to study there. These are special types of people. That's not, born in a West family and go to a law school and then go to a law firm and not leave your country and think that that's the world. So maybe that's a reason for not being resilient. And they have a sense of autonomy, but not as high as theirs. So it may well be that the next generation of people is different, and you can achieve other things than you can achieve with the typical type of lawyers. Now we have looked at all the criteria of Larry's study and have applied it to these young people. What they don't have is ego drive and aggressiveness. That is very hardly existing. But they have a high sense for thoroughness, flexibility, idea orientation. They have an idea more than earning money, empathy, risk-taking, and so on. So that is the next generation of people, and that is on their top 10 list. Why do they study law? What moves them forward? And it's very much make the world a better place. I have heard that the CIA says the same thing, right? Is it the case? But what they want to achieve is make the world a better place, law for good. Now, this is, of course, I'm not criticizing Larry, not at all. What I'm saying is that there is a new generation of people with a new set of values, and maybe law firms will look different. But there is a but. Larry analyzed full-blown lawyers. We analyze young students. And this is not a longitudinal study, so we don't see how values develop over time. Maybe this is fragile. Maybe these people add a bit of law school debt and add a bit of money from law firm, and maybe they change all of a sudden. Maybe some of these values just go away because US students in this in this research perform differently. For them, money plays a bigger role, which is natural. I mean, what's the amount of money they have when they leave law school?
130,000
Yeah.
US dollars.
You are not surprised that they are interested in a high salary. Okay, so that is what we're actually doing with people, and what are we doing with this research? We are, of course, continuing this research. We are talking to law firms. We're trying to set up new performance and appraisal models with law firms to appraise those things law firms really want to achieve with their people and where these people are good at. So long with people. As I said, just sketches from Germany. The world may be completely different in the United States or in Asia. Innovation. We have talked a lot about innovation yesterday. And for some time, it seemed to me that it was impossible to use the term innovation without the word disruptive. And it is as if people take pride and joy in destroy things. Innovation, yeah. And you know what happens? Innovation scares people. That is the consequence. The function of innovation is to better society, to make our lives better. Why do we invent machines? Because we want to replace people? No, that's not the purpose of inventing a machine. It's to help them not to do a job which ruins their health at their 40s and brings them to the grave at their 50s. That's the role of innovation. But we have a means of presenting innovation of something which frightens people. You are being replaced by technology and innovation. And we take Uber as the role model for innovation. And these are pictures which show you the Luddites of today. You know, you have an impression how it looked like when the weavers, the Luddites, ran against the machines. And what is Uber? Uber is an idea and technology. It's shed loads of money, and it's a very bold interpretation of existing rules. So, maybe it's disregarding the rules. That is innovation, how we understand it today. And I'm not surprised that people are frightened by that. So if we don't look at innovation in a holistic way, like Juke did it yesterday, There is no innovation without getting the people on your side and then change things. But just to change things and don't care about the people, it doesn't work. So that frightens people. And the interesting thing is, we don't know anything about the consequences of innovation. Even the inventors don't. And that is my point we have to bear in mind. You know, remember 2007, January 2007, this iconic presentation of the first iPhone. If you haven't seen it, look at it. It's great. It's a moment in history. And Steve Jobs raised this thing and said, Apple has reinvented the phone. Apple has reinvented the phone. Guys, who's using this thing as a telephone today? I. You know, vintage 57. But my 15-year-old daughter, she does everything with it. And she communicates like hell. And she says, well, sometimes daddy calls me, but I always miss his calls, I don't need it. She doesn't use it as a telephone. So and there is this famous tweet from 2016 written in emojis, completely new. In less than 10 years, the iPhone replaced all sorts of applications. In 2007, no one had an idea of what the iPhone could do, leave alone that the iPhone has changed the way we communicate, we move, we behave to each other, and what we do all day. It has completely changed our life. But even Steve Jobs had no idea what that would mean. He knew that he presents something which was gorgeous and new and cool. But he didn't know that he really changed the world at that moment. And there is one evidence for that. What is really innovative with the iPhone is not just the device. The device is new and cool and interesting. It's the platform. It's the platform. The iPhone is a platform bringing app producer and customers together. And Apple earns 30% of each app which is sold. And the Apple Store, the App Store was introduced in July 2008. Steve Jobs was against it. So the real innovation, even Steve Jobs had no idea what it meant. So, and what are we doing with this in Germany, in our little town? We say, okay, as we don't know what happens with innovation and what the future will bring, let's do it by ourselves. I thought this quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln in a city like Chicago is appropriate. So the best way to predict it is to create it. What did we do? We have entered into a joint initiative with Baker McKenzie, Bosch, Daimler, Wolters Kluwer, and ZF. ZF is one of the big automotive supplier. Then 3 startups and a group of students, the Legal Tech Lab. And we have founded the first innovation hub. It needs a name. And this is a place where clients and law firms get together and start to test new ways of working with startup people who do not just invent sexy applications for no one, which are because they don't have any sales policy. They develop their tools together with clients and with law firms. And why is it Baker McKenzie and not any other firm? Because the chief strategy officer of Baker McKenzie is the former dean of the Bucerius Law School. So it's always people having an idea and then bringing institutions together. And that's the reason why Bucerius is part of this enterprise, because we think only in that way, by getting people together and developing new ways of working, we can get people on our side and support what we are doing with innovation. And now comes technology. So when innovation frightens people, technology drives us mad. If you look at the discussion about technology and legal tech, it's like a BMW. It's purely driven by emotion. This is a discussion which is completely free of facts. It's even not based on alternative facts. It's free of facts. It's purely driven of opinion and emotion. I take the view that in 3 years, 50% of you will be replaced by computers. And if you would ask, do you have any facts, or how do you come to this view? He would say, yeah, that's my opinion. So this debate is terrible. And of course, it frightens people again. It brings people up against technology, although technology should be something which helps us to do a better job, to live better, to move better, to work better, to have a better interface to our clients. That's the role what technology should have. And we look at technology rather hostile. So Bucerius has done commissioned 2 studies. One study, that is the How Legal Technology Will Change the Business of Law, is available in the internet. The other one is an internal study, just to find out what is the impact technology really has. And today, you will be surprised, there is an impact, but it's not disruptive. It's not revolutionary. It's one of these small innovations which improves things. And it may develop further, but at the moment, it's slowly moving. But still, sorry, German lawyers, and confronted with this way of discussing things, have this German angst. 44% of German lawyers think technology is a bad thing. It's only good for the non-lawyer competition. Whereas the further, say, open-minded law firms think, okay, technology is something we could use for cost-cutting, develop new products, improve their performance. It's a very shaky picture at the moment. And what we have done now, this is, last year we brought a book to the market on all these related issues, and the good thing, if people are nervous, it's good for your sales, I have to say that. So it's now the #1 bestseller, and you can't imagine how proud I am that 3 authors of the international edition, which is about to come to the market in September, are in this room. It's Mark Cohen, it's David Curl, and Dan Linner. And Mark, as usual, counts double because he has written 2 chapters. So watch this.
The first one wasn't good enough. You didn't say that.
Watch this space when this book comes. But what I'm going to say, legal tech or technology, what's the fuss about it? Why are we so excited when it comes to legal technology or technology? So the good thing with technology is it has brought our attention to the way how legal services can be provided and should be provided today. So technology is a sort of driver to move our thinking, to think about the business of law and the practice of law and the differences of that. But it's not technology as such. There is a certain hype which is not helpful. So many people think digital transformation would be to digitize traditional workflows. That is not digital transformation. And just to buy software has nothing to do with digitalization. That is the difficult point of it. But we have started to think about it. And I think we are expecting interesting times because the way legal services are produced together with other people and then delivered to clients will be even completely different from that what we think today in modern role model law firms where we think they are really innovative. We haven't really tested that. With we, I am talking of law firms. Now, finally, good news for law firms. Law firms are not per se innovative. They are not. Why should they? They are innovative when they are driven by their clients. Now, good news is clients consist of lawyers. And lawyers and clients, in-house legal departments, oh my God, they are so lagging behind. They are so uninnovative. There may be some exemptions of the rule, but overall, there has been a survey of the Harvard Business Review recently published, and it shows in-house legal departments have no clue what is coming up to them. They say, yes, we know we have to do something next year or so. And we have tested one tool. That was great. So that's the way how they move to it. For that time, it's good for law firms because they don't have to change. That's good news for law firms. And this is basically it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Really interesting. Lots to talk about there. I'm just going to ask a couple of general questions, and then we'll see where people want to go with it. I know that you're the director of the Bucerius Center on the Legal Profession. Can you say a little bit about what the center does and how it might compare to centers here in the US, Harvard, Stanford, Georgetown?
Okay. I mean, Harvard and Stanford also have a center on the legal profession. The special thing is, Bucerius is a law school like Northwestern or like any other law school. The difference in Germany is that it's the only privately funded law school. All other law schools are at universities and are publicly funded. And Bucerius always took the view that although their core business is to train students to their first exam, and this is it for law schools, they said we have to pursue the concept of lifelong learning. So our students have to keep on learning of what the profession expects from them. Bucerius has an executive education arm. So Bucerius provides training to lawyers, to in-house legal, to in-house lawyers. And then back in 2009, we thought that just to offer training courses is not enough because there are so many providers of training courses. And we said, if we really want to be forward and set up ourselves from the competition, we need an institute which does research and writes studies and gives lectures and interviews people and is the point to go if you have a question as regards to legal markets. And that's the Bucerius Center on the Legal Profession. So if someone has a question in Germany or in German-speaking countries, they very often turn to us. And that was our goal. And that is special as it is no legal professorship what I have. So in Germany, you should not call me professor because I'm not a legal professor. That's the German end of it.
From the chart that you showed, it looks like the Bucerius students are really resilient and sociable. Do they come to you that way, or do you guys do something special to bring up those numbers?
The good thing with Bucerius is that it has a competitive advantage to other universities. Other universities don't have any tests when students come. They just look at their Abitur, which is A grade. While Bucerius has tests and looks at the personality, so these are people who are not just good pupils, that is one point. Many of them play an instrument or have some social engagement or are just more rounded personalities. And that is one point. And if you would say, well, Bucerius students are different, it's because we have the privilege to pick and choose. If other universities would do that as well, probably the number of law students would dramatically decrease. We have 800 applicants each year, and we take only 112. And it's a privilege.
Sounds like it. You talked a little bit towards the end about the legal tech scene. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on with legal tech in Germany and how that compares to other countries?
Yeah. The legal tech scene in Germany is, I would say, okayish compared to other countries. It's, for example, Austria is further developed, France is far more innovative, leave alone the UK, but we often divide between UK and the rest of Europe. So in Germany, we have a number of platforms. We have a very vivid AI scene, which has not yet developed the legal sector, bar one application, which is a document review application called Leverton. Andrew, you probably know that. That's something like Kira or Luminance only for the real estate sector. And it was some groundbreaking. Today, I would say it's a market-leading standard application for document review in real estate transactions. The issue with legal tech is that the legal environment is rather hostile. That you can compare that with the United States. So there are many claims based on unauthorized practice of law, because the federal bar takes the view that services like of LegalZoom coming out of a machine are regarded as legal services and should be regulated by the bar. We think it should be regulated to make clear to people that that what is coming from the machine is something which is coming from the machine, but it's not legal service. So the regulation should be different, and that is an issue for startup companies because investors are hardly available for an environment which is legally unclear.
So some similar issues to here in other countries. You talked about legal tech not being about digitization. Where do you think the market is developing? In particular, do you share the same view that was raised yesterday by Eva and John about great times ahead, golden age?
Golden age. Well, I see it slightly different. I see that the amount of legal or compliance issues is not decreasing, it is increasing. The world is getting more complicated. And what Johan showed yesterday, the amount of regulation he has to comply with, I mean, it's a nightmare. And it's not getting better. With this new GDPR in Germany, things are really getting complicated. So with regard to the amount of legal issues and legal nuts to be cracked, great news. But there is a but. The but is the number of lawyers understood by people who went through law school, leave law school with a debt burden of more than 100,000 euro, being admitted to the bar. I'm not sure that we really need more lawyers. We will need more people to deal with legal issues, trained for certain issues, and to be augmented by technology. But you know, you don't need to go to law school and have a full-blown law school to sort of deal with document review applications or do certain compliance things. So lawyers today have a certain salary level, and we will have more people also in law firms which will have a lower salary level and which will not carry the title of lawyer because it's not necessary to be a lawyer. And that is my concern. So if we don't differentiate between the different legal roles, paralegals, the data analyst, project manager, process managers, lawyers, barristers, people who go to court, if we don't do that, as a law school, for example, we would fool ourselves. So I'm not as optimistic. I'm optimistic as regards to the amount of work we have to deal with. But to the number of lawyers, highly paid lawyers, I'm a bit skeptical.
So maybe a silver age, something like that. All right, we're going to open it up. Start here with Mark.
Just to that point, Marcus, I'd like to ask you, how would you today, given the statement you just made in terms of the future, what is a functional definition of a lawyer looking, let's say, 3 years, 5 years into the future, as we start to maybe more closely parallel the medical industry, where of course you still have physicians, but they are functioning very differently than they used to?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Today, I would say what lawyers should do is they take their knowledge and they take their experience and transform it into value added to clients. So that's basically what lawyers should do. Not just experience and not just knowledge. It's the mixture. And what is it in the end what lawyers should do? They should provide relief to clients. Now, coming from that, so relief by means of there is someone who takes care of an issue I have and I don't know how to deal with it. And now let's assume it's a legal issue. Now, coming from that end to provide relief is something which requires empathy, the ability to understand how people react and other people on the other side react, and to be very creative in difficult and unclear and ambiguous environments. And that on the base of a very solid legal knowledge. And there will always be a place for lawyers doing exactly this. But the amount of cases or matters for the number of lawyers we have today, that is the point which makes me skeptical. And from my slides where I showed you how these segments on the legal markets move, the strategy at the moment to say either we grow like hell, like the Dentons and DLA, which is a completely sound strategy, it's a very sound strategy in uncertain times, you can't do that organically. So you have to merge, like Dentons is doing it. The other way up the market to say we will only focus on very high-class, premium, profitable work. Question is, for how many high-class Wachtels and Hengelers and Slaughters and May is there place in this market? Because this market is not free of commoditization. That I would say. But still, like a doctor who provides relief to a patient, even if he tells him, you are going to die, then you can provide relief by accompanying someone. So it's not that dramatic with lawyers. But you know, to tell someone it's a serious situation, you may lose this case, but I will help you through this process by making use of all means, technical and non-lawyer resources to help you through this, and I will stand by your side, and that's what a lawyer should do.
You mentioned the non-lawyer competition in Germany. So what is it, how does that shape up?
Yeah, it's interesting. Germany has a very far-reaching lawyer monopoly. So the definition of that, what only lawyers may do, is very broad. It says every individual case where the law has to be applied, that has to be done through a lawyer. And of course, there are certain companies who try to find loopholes, and there is this law regulating access to the market, which allows for so-called debt collection companies, Inkassofirmen, that they get an admission to act even if they are not lawyers. Now, many of these startup companies who help customers to regain their money, like Flightwide, so compensation if your plane is late, or if your landlord has claimed too much rent, and so they find certain loopholes to act like debt collection agencies, and that works for a certain extent. But someone like Joshua Browder with his do not pay would be illegal in Germany. So these chatbots providing help to immigrants, which is not collecting money, but helping to which administration you have to go and all these things, that would be illegal when it doesn't come from a lawyer, and lawyers don't do that because they are not there where the immigrants are, and they don't invest in setting up platforms where immigrants can just log in and in their home language, in Syrian, ask a question, how do I get, say, financial help and all these things. That doesn't exist. So we have a situation in Germany where access to law for those who really, really need it is just not there. We think legal tech companies could provide it, and the federal bar is taking a different view on that. So let's wait and see. That's very much in, that's moving, but very slowly moving.
Same thing here.
Look, there is a question over there.
Well,
And then
David, we'll go here.
Okay, I want to continue on the theme of picking apart Germany specifically. One thing that, sorry, exploring Germany a little bit. You talked about some limitations, like the regulatory scheme you just talked about. But what's the role of scale in developing legal tech in a place like Germany? I mean,
Yeah.
Germany's not a small country; it's the biggest economy in Europe, but it is much smaller than the United States or the UK or other legal markets.
Actually,
how
yeah.
does since this is a global conference, how does a country the size of Germany approach legal tech? Can you really achieve the type of scale you need to successfully build?
No. Look, there are only 3 countries in the world where people speak German. That is Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and this is it. And of course, it's a small market. We still have many startup companies because many of these founders don't give it a damn when they start, whether it's a big market or not. They have an idea and they work on that idea, and they don't think about sales and growth and these things. When they want to grow and looking for venture capital, they realize it's a very tough business. So as long as Germany is not willing to move to, like the Netherlands, to an English-speaking environment, which is starting at the moment in courts, that certain chambers at courts do their processes in English. For that time, the German market is difficult, and Europe is difficult. Europe for legal tech startups is difficult because read papers from the EU Commission coming in, I don't know how many languages. And each country, as big or as small as it is, claims that its language, and even if it's Finnish, has to be taken into account in papers coming from the EU Commission. Sorry if someone comes from Finland. But that, of course, limits the growth, and therefore companies who do, a company like a case text would be great for German lawyers to have that, because I think this really moves things forward. Or that's what you are doing with Ross. But you need people who do it not for the money, who invent things and develop things not for the money. If you just do it for the money, you wouldn't do it. Too small.
Well, sort of segueing into that, a lot of the speakers have sort of briefly touched, but not fully touched on how this new generation and people and process and technology might eventually converge for social good in the law and open access to populations that haven't had as much access and make it easier for them to procure and retain legal services in Germany and elsewhere. How do you see that happening with this new generation that says that they're coming to law school specifically to do good?
I mean, with regard to technology, it's interesting to see that I would focus on 2 points, diversity and technology. With regard to technology, for them technology is a given. It's, they would not go to a law firm which does not use technology, not because they are nerds or want to have an iPad or so. Technology is a proxy for flexible working and not doing the boring stuff. So this is a generation of people who says there must be an app for that. You can't motivate these people to sift through folders of documents. They want to go to a law firm which really looks for apps or for technology doing this so that these people can do interesting things, A, and B, technology allows them not to sit in the office but to work where they are and have a more flexible family work life. That's with regard to technology. So a law firm which says technology doesn't play a major role with us, I would say good luck with regard to recruiting. Second, diversity. For us, diversity at the moment is something where we develop, it's like learning to walk. That we realize the way we law firms deal with diversity, it doesn't have a future with 10% of female partners in your ranks. That's completely weird. And this generation, for them, if you talk with them about diversity, they just don't understand what you're talking about. They would say, how on earth you could work in a non-diverse environment? I mean, in these international classes, you have people from all sorts of countries and mixtures and peoples and I don't know how many genders are there, but they grow up in an environment which is by nature diverse. And if we tell them, well, in law firms that they really work hard to increase their female percentage of partners, they look at you and they don't. I mean, they expect management being diverse and not just saying they are diverse. They want to have all sorts of gender, races, ethnical, cultural, and you name it, reflected in management. And I see certain issues of traditional law firms in this generation, so there will be a culture clash. Well, don't know how hard, but there will be a clash.
You.
I want to come back to the law school one and question about Bucerius. On the one hand, you talk about Bucerius and a number of the initiatives represented by folks at this conference. Ryerson, we've talked about the graph that shows a lot of the innovation. But the other side of the coin is, you can point to Europe, and maybe this is also true of Latin America, complicated. So is the other side of the coin is you were destabilized, Bucerius and those institutions are setting out a footprint to really do innovative stuff, but they're facing this behemoth, right, of dozens, in some cases 100 years of tradition from the big public law schools, who, you know, that have most of the alums who are in the sector. I doubt Toronto is quaking in its boots about Ryerson. I doubt the great German law schools are quaking their boots. So how are you going to see innovation in that? Is that going to take 100 years?
It started with Bucerius only. You now see many groups of students and lectures on technology in other very traditional universities. Munich, for example, Münster, and you have it in Cologne, and I get calls, and then I go to other universities and give speeches. It is a bit like, so things are moving. It's not only Bucerius, and for us it was always important to sort of export it and not only have legal tech at Bucerius. That's nice to start with, but that's not sustainable. But changing a curriculum, and it's a bit like here, you know, like the ABA accreditation and state requirements and how innovative can you be in a university. That'll take time, but the German justice ministers have now built up a working group dealing with legal technology with a focus to how to regulate it. And we said, whether you want to regulate it or not, the good thing is that you start to look at it. And we would expect that technology will play a part in the university curricula, because for a very simple reason, if you require lawyers to work with technology which has market standard like e-discovery or document review or all the other things, and there are people who do not understand what they're doing, how can you be an ethical lawyer if you work with a tool which you don't understand? How can you sell the result of something where you don't know how it came together? So you have to train people in order to maintain a certain ethical level for those people, and leave alone judges who maybe at some time in Germany will deal with software which makes a recommendation which says Marcus Hartung should go to jail because he fits a certain pattern. So we have to train people to that, and Germans sometimes tend to be, I mean, we are looking for the Holy Grail, but sometimes we are pragmatic, and at the moment it seems to me that a bit more pragmatism is taking place.
On that note, if you have other questions, maybe Marcus will be around for a little bit. You can talk to him then. Please join me in thanking Marcus for those.
Okay, our next speaker is Laura Weingarten, and her moderator will be David Schwartz. I did. So let me just briefly introduce Laura. Laura is I think, emblematic of the global citizen. She hails from South Africa. She lives in Toronto. And she has a very interesting background as well. She comes from a marketing background, and she and her husband are co-founders of a very interesting AI company called Diligent. I'm sure she'll tell us all about it, and I will simply say that Laura and Diligent are part of, we've mentioned Ryerson, and I want to just give a special shout out to them. They've just gotten their accreditation for starting law school, and my view is that the last thing in the world that we need is another law school, with the exception of a law school like Ryerson, which is, I think, really going to sort of start, you know, with a whole new kind of sense of what it means to train lawyers of the future. And even before they became or have become a law school, they have hatched companies like Diligent. And so, without further ado, Laura, welcome and thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura van Weengon. I'm the COO and co-founder of Diligent, as Mark mentioned. So I remember when I was in primary school, so this was 1990 South Africa, and I'd want to call a friend. And of course, back then, there were no cell phones. There was no way to text anyone. There was definitely no social media. And so I'd have to call them on the landline and then make really awkward small talk with their parents when they answered the phone while I waited for my friend to come to the phone. And so I got my first cell phone when I was about 13. It was a hand-me-down from one of my parents. And it looked like something like this. Some of you might remember this phone. It was like a black and white screen, or sort of dark gray and greenish, big pixelated text. And you couldn't do that much with it. But what you could do is change your ringtone and play Snake. Some of you might remember this game. This was not a sophisticated game. It was essentially just a sort of a line with a dot. But nevertheless, this was all pretty exciting. My presentation has disappeared.
Should have used the Nokia. It's in the phone.
Technology is failing us right now. Let's see. Okay, we're back now. Okay, so in my early high school years, homework research was done in the library with actual physical paper books, or at best with Carter Encyclopedia CD-ROMs like this one. And these were actually pretty amazing. They took an entire shelf worth of encyclopedias and compressed it onto one disk. My earliest memories of the internet were chat rooms in my mid-high school years. And if you remember, when you logged onto the internet back then, it made this absolutely terrible sound, which I'm playing for you right now to bring back those memories. It actually gets worse after that, but I decided to cut that for you. And you know what these chat rooms did for me was allow me to connect with all sorts of people from all over the world instantly, instead of the people who were just in my immediate physical environment. And that felt pretty magical. It opened up this whole new world to explore. As Arthur C. Clarke notes, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And technology can certainly feel magical when it allows us to do things we've never done before. 15 years later, and running an artificial intelligence company, it feels like a lot has changed from the days that we had encyclopedias on CD and screechy dial-up internet. I feel, and you might too, that a lot has changed technologically. And not just that, but the pace of change itself is accelerating. And we're not imagining that. Taking a look at this chart here, this is the time to mass adoption for various technologies over the last few decades. So we've got the airplane coming in there at 68 years. We've got 50 years for the phone, 38 for the radio, 22 for TV, 14 for PC, 7 for the internet, 3 for mobile phones, 2 for Facebook, and just 19 days for Pokemon Go. So what's driving this acceleration? What's causing technology to become more and more capable, more and more central to our daily lives? Well, one of the reasons is that we now have more processing power available to us than ever before. You may have heard of Moore's Law. So Gordon Moore was one of the co-founders of Intel, and in 1965, he predicted that the amount of processing power that we'd be able to buy for $1 would double every year. So in other words, in 1966, you'd be able to buy twice as much processing power as in 1965 for the same price. So Moore later revised his estimate in 1975 to doubling every 2 years. But Moore's prediction has remained more or less true every 18 months. So in other words, processing power available to us has doubled every 18 months. That's really extraordinary, doubling every 18 months. Our medicines don't get twice as effective every 18 months. Our airplanes don't fly twice as fast. Our investments don't generally double in value every 18 months, as much as we might like that. So when something is doubling every 18 months, That's really extraordinary, and we rarely see that kind of growth in any other field of human endeavor. Now, as humans, we tend to easily appreciate steady increases in things, linear growth, but we tend to underestimate just how fast things can change when they're doubling at regular intervals, when they're growing exponentially. So to illustrate this, let's take a look at an example. All right, so Star Trek fans might remember the episode where the Enterprise crew takes on board a small fluffy creature called a Tribble. Now, the trouble with the Tribbles is that their very high birth rate meant that their population was doubling. It was growing exponentially. Okay, so let's imagine in this scenario that it's Monday morning at 8 a.m. and I have 1 Tribble. And by 10 a.m. that Monday morning, I have 2 Tribbles. Okay, at lunchtime, I have 4 Tribbles. Now, so at this point, I still have a fairly small number of Tribbles. But by the time I wake up on Tuesday morning, I have 4,000 Tribbles. And by lunchtime, I have 16,000 Tribbles. Okay, so 1 to 4 over the course of Monday morning, 4,000 to 16,000 over the course of Tuesday morning. So at this point, the Tribbles are spilling out of all the cabinets and the elevators. But extrapolate that out, and by Thursday, you have 500 million Tribbles, or enough Tribbles to fill every cubic inch of the Enterprise spaceship. So here's the point. With exponential growth, small numbers get big fast. So here's the thing for us when it comes to Moore's law and the steady doubling of computing power. For us, it's no longer Monday. We've seen this doubling since the 60s. So when we have twice as much computing power available to us as in 2017, the beginning of 2017, so 18 months ago, that starts to get really significant. And it allows us to do the kind of things we've never done before. It allows us to build technology we've never built before. It allows us to leverage our effort in new ways. It extends our reach far beyond what has been possible before. And that matters. As Paul Krugman notes, economist, a country's ability to improve its standard of living over time depends almost entirely on its ability to raise its output per worker. So put a little bit more simply, raise output per worker or do more with less. Unfortunately, that's exactly what technology allows us to do. It allows us to do more with less. And particularly, the large and growing amounts of processing power that we now have available to us have allowed us to create the kind of digital and AI-powered products that break the rules of the material world and allow us to do things that we've never done before. So particularly, it breaks the rules of physical goods, material goods, and allows us to create massive, accessible, and inexhaustible digital resources. So to illustrate this, I'm going to take you through the properties of physical, digital, and AI-powered goods and show you how they're different and why all this processing power helping us create these digital and AI-powered goods is a really positive thing. Okay, we're going to start with physical goods. So physical goods are everything from consumables like this apple to tools and furniture and machinery, the 3D objects of our everyday lives. So one of the properties of physical goods is that the more we use them, the less useful they become. Okay, so they get used up, they wear away, they break down, they have to be replaced. They have diminishing utility over time. They also generally can only be used by one person at a time. So if I eat that apple, then no one else can have it. If I'm riding that bicycle, then no one else can ride it at the same time. So they have a limited use. Physical goods just don't scale well. And once we've created them, they tend to give us diminishing returns over time. All right, so that's physical goods. Now let's contrast that to digital goods, because here's where things start to get really interesting. So digital goods are things like electronic books or apps, software, videos. And one of the properties of digital goods is that no matter how much you use them, they can't get used up. Their utility is unchanged. Another property of them is what is called non-rival, which means more than one person can use it at the same time. So both you and I and a million of our closest friends can watch a video and it doesn't get used up. And the other thing, so here's another example. So think of a physical textbook and then think about a YouTube lecture with the same content that can be accessed by thousands or millions of people. There's a fundamentally different relationship between the effort we could put in to create those resources and the use that we collectively can get out of them. And so digital goods can also serve us on a massive scale. Consider the 3 billion views that this video got. All right, so now let's talk about AI-powered products, because this is where things get really, really interesting. So AI-powered products have all the beneficial properties of digital products in being enduring and shareable, but they have this additional dimension which makes them even more useful to us. So what we saw with physical goods is that the more we use them, the less useful they become to us. Utility goes down. Digital goods, utility unchanged. No matter how much you use them, they don't get used up. But with AI, the more we use it, the more use we collectively can get out of it. So an example would be Siri. So Siri is, as I'm sure you know, Apple's artificially intelligent assistant, first released with the iPhone 4S in 2011. And since then, the millions and millions of interactions that users have had with Siri has made it more useful to each person who's used it subsequently. The more we use it, the more use we collectively get out of it. Okay, so we've looked at physical, digital, and AI-powered goods and looked how they're different. Let's track a single problem through those 3 levels of solution. All right, so let's say that you would like to get from the airport to this conference center. And to do that, you're going to use this physical map. So it's a bit bulky, but assuming it's up to date, you can use it and you can get to the conference center. But now let's imagine that everyone in the room, all of us, want to use your map. Well, that would be a bit tricky, and we could try and pass it between all of us, and that would be a bit awkward. But even if we did manage to do that, it would start falling apart at the folds and become less and less useful over time. So think about these map makers. If they want to help an additional person navigate, they have to print and deliver a whole new map. And as soon as the roads change, they all become useless, and they have to print and deliver them again. Not a super effective way of helping a lot of people navigate. Okay, so let's look at the next time you decide to use a digital map. So you pull out your phone, and immediately this is much easier. It's in this compact package. You don't even have to keep pulling over to look at the directions. It's going to read it to you. So you get here slightly faster. So now let's imagine all of us want to use your digital map to get from the airport to this conference center. Well, actually, this time we can all use your map. That's no problem. And get here just as effectively. So this is a really effective way of helping a lot of people navigate. Okay, final example. You want to get to the conference center, and this time you use an AI-powered map. And this map, instead of just giving you the most direct route, is going to give you the fastest route for you right now, given traffic conditions, because it's able to monitor and calculate these things in real time. And let's say you get here in half the time. So what happens if all of us want to use your AI-powered map? Well, actually, that's exactly how you managed to get here in half the time, because all of us were using the map. And it was monitoring how fast we were proceeding towards the conference center and rerouting us if there was a faster way. The more we use it, the more use we collectively get out of it. So this is a really powerful solution, and it's the level of solution that we want. So we've seen how technology helps us do more with less, and how AI helps us do, in some cases, a lot more with a lot less. Except when the clicker doesn't work. Okay. So now let's talk about something that I'm sure we're all thinking about. How are these new technologies, these new AI products, affecting the practice of law? Does anyone know what this is? Ah, very good. It is indeed a telex machine. Excellent. So this is a telex machine, and it was like electronic telegram. So it allowed lawyers to send written messages between firms. And so if you were practicing law in the early 1980s, this was state of the art, and all the big firms had one. And it allowed lawyers to do something that they'd never done before, which was written communication faster than the speed of mail. And it had the effect of speeding up the pace at which work could be accomplished. So if you were amending and negotiating contracts in the time of typewriters, the way it was done is you'd actually physically cut and then scotch tape the new text over the original contract. And apparently, when that original piece of paper got too thick to pass through the typewriter again, that was the time to stop negotiating the contract, because no one wanted to retype the whole thing. I heard a story from a senior partner who practiced at the time, and he told me what would happen very occasionally was his assistant would be chain smoking at her desk, and the ash would fall on the contract, and it would actually catch fire. And of course, there was no copy of this, so they were in big trouble. It was clearly a very different time. So the fax machine actually brought really big changes to the practice of law. And when I spoke to a senior M&A lawyer about what he remembers from this time, he said that when they first got a fax machine at their firm, the whole office crowded around in awe to see that first fax come in. And it was loud. And he said that it was actually the technology that changed the way he practiced the most, because it allowed law firms to exchange documents without having to resort to the mail or courier, or what was apparently common practice at the time, getting an art-clean student to deliver the document. And it actually brought down the time it took to complete a transaction from 3 to 4 weeks pre-fax to 1 week post-fax. So it had the ability to speed up the pace that work could be completed for the client. So here's the lesson here. In law, technology has always evolved. Of course, the PC and internet had equally large changes or larger changes on the way that lawyers operate. And now it seems AI is everywhere. Taking a look at our AI legal landscape map here, we can see legal research companies like BlueJ or Ross, we'll be hearing from Andrew shortly, prediction technology like LexPredict and LexMachina, expertise automation like Neotologic, contract analysis software like Diligent. And this is a trend we can expect to continue. As Andrew Ng notes, AI is the new electricity. And we can expect AI to be powering all sorts of useful things over the years ahead. When it comes to AI, it can seem like a little bit of a black box. You have an input, and then some magic happens, and then you have an output. So let's take a closer look at what AI can actually do and what happens behind the scenes. And to do that, I'm going to give you an example of how users can train Diligent to recognize a new clause. Now remember, there are lots of different types of machine learning, but this will give you a sense of how supervised learning can help algorithms understand concepts in text, specifically clauses in this case. Okay, so to show you this, I'm going to show you 3 phases to get to your outcome, just training, feedback, and input, and impact. So we'll start with training. So Diligent is already trained to recognize over 100 clauses, but this is how you, the user, could train it to recognize an additional one. For it to recognize a new clause, which we'll call clause X in this case, you will start by giving the system some data. So you're going to give it examples of what you're looking for. Now, at this point, think of your machine learning algorithm like a very junior lawyer who's just joined your team.
No.
They're a smart person, but they're a smart person, but they don't yet know what you're looking for, so they can't be helpful. So you're going to start by showing them examples of what you're looking for. This is what clause X looks like. It looks like this and like this and like this, but not like that. And of course, the more examples you provide the system, the better its accuracy is going to be. So you want to provide lots of good examples. And that would be no different with your you're a new junior lawyer. You've got to be a good trainer, right? Okay, that brings us to step 2, which is feedback. So feedback is the stage where your new junior team member actually has a sense of what they're supposed to do. They're starting to do work, but they're doing it under your supervision, and you're providing guidance as needed. So to borrow an example from a related field of AI, dog or bagel, it may take you a minute to make that calculation yourself. And if you're sitting at the back of the room right now, these all might look sort of somewhat delicious. So this is from the field of AI where they train algorithms to recognize objects in images. And most of the time, of course, it's not that difficult to tell apart a dog from a bagel because those are quite different. Except sometimes, as in these examples, they're not. And so in this phase of feedback, what you're doing is helping the system make finer distinctions between things. You're sorting out those gray areas. You're giving it that kind of feedback so it can become a more and more sophisticated and better at finding clause X in your contracts. So if it returns all of these as clause X, you can give it feedback and say tell it where it's gone wrong. Okay, so this is your final phase, which is impact, which is where you reap the rewards of the training you've done. So at this point, your algorithm is highly trained, able to accurately find clause X in all of your contracts. Unfortunately, this doesn't take years. You've now got it's probably within about 30 examples. And you've now got the equivalent of a very senior team member in that very, very specific area of expertise. So this algorithm is now able to find clause X in thousands of your contracts or tens of thousands. And as we've talked about today, AI can be incredibly powerful in helping you leverage your efforts. And this is true here as well. So in the time it's taken you to train the system to look for that clause, it can now look for it in hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of contracts, and saving your team dozens or hundreds or thousands of hours, depending on your use case. And of course, all of your team can use this algorithm forever. It doesn't wear out. The more you use it, the more useful it becomes. That's true here as well. So let's recap a couple of the themes from today. Technology is magical in its ability to allow us to do things we've never done before. Technology has always evolved. And technology helps us do more and do better. So if Moore's law holds constant, and if in 18 months, at the end of next year, we have twice as much processing power available to us as we do right now, imagine what would be possible. And if we meet again at a conference in 4 or 5 years, our technology now, what looks to us like the very cutting edge, might start to look like the telex does to us now. And I, for one, am excited about what that means for the future of law. Okay. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
So great, fascinating presentation. I think it was excellent to hear a little bit about the history and kind of situate things. You talked a little bit about your company. Can you explain a little more about the company and what it does?
Sure thing. So, what we do is we're machine learning software for contract analysis. So we help lawyers and legal teams review their contracts more efficiently. And we do that by, the lawyers will upload their contracts onto our software that they would otherwise review manually. And the algorithms help identify certain clauses, they pull them out for them, compile contract summaries automatically, and help lawyers manage the review process as well. So all the things that are really time-consuming in contract review, our system helps facilitate that. So legal teams can do their contract review in a much shorter time period.
How did you come about entering the space?
Yeah, so it really came about by trying to solve a problem. My co-founder, Conrad, he was a corporate associate at a large global firm for years, and he spent a lot of time reviewing contracts. This was a weekends and late nights and, really painful task, I think. And I think if there are other corporate lawyers in the room who remember that from early in their career. It's a bit of a painful thing to do, all that due diligence. And, you know, we thought that there had to be a better way. And at the time, we were also seeing AI pop up in all sorts of industries, you know, medical and robotics, and start to see some interesting things happening. And that's where we thought, well, what if we apply AI to this problem? And back then, it was a stranger thought than it is now. It was, people definitely thought it was pretty odd. But now it seems that there's a lot of acceptance.
How long ago was that?
3 years ago.
3 years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah.
What are some pressures you see in the market right now?
Pressures. You know, I mean, the way that what we're seeing is that we've gone from the point where using contract analysis software or using, you know, other types of AI products to do legal tasks has gone from sort of a fringe activity, you know, where only the sort of most innovative firms would do it or consider it, to being much, much more normal and becoming, it's not quite expected yet, but going that direction. So we're seeing really, really good adoption, a lot of interest. You know, and I think that a lot of these tasks where there are really good AI solutions for them, that will become the standard way you would do things. And, you know, going back to you know, reviewing contracts manually instead of using AI would be a bit like being like, I'm just not going to use email. I'm going to handwrite a letter with a fountain pen and deliver it by carrier pigeon. You just wouldn't do it, right? It's just not efficient.
Okay. So one thing that I've heard a lot about is kind of the innovation community in Toronto. And I'm not sure if others here are familiar with it, but can you speak a little bit about that and also just kind of the scene in Canada more broadly?
Sure. Yeah, you know, something that is certainly increased exponentially as well is the number of times that people talk to me about the AI scene in Toronto every time I leave it. So I know that I'm not imagining the fact that it's got, you know, so much more vibrant, and particularly the legal tech scene. You know, years ago when we started Diligent, we didn't have the sense that there was this blossoming legal tech community, and then, you know, as we went along, we felt like it seemed to develop around us. And initially we thought, you know, we might be imagining that, but then everyone else told us this is what's happening as well. So, you know, what we're seeing is things like, I think there's a number of things that make Canada extremely friendly to innovation. There's things like the government support for research and development, so you can get huge credits back on the salaries you pay to the people who are doing research and development in Canada. So I think that's something that helps foster innovation. Canada attracts really, really talented people from all over the world. And if I look at, you know, our team, we have team members from 5 continents. It's incredibly diverse. Actually, minority of people are born in Canada on our team. Really, really highly skilled people who've, you know, come to Canada, and that makes the talent extremely rich there. And you know, if we think about, you know, we've talked, I think the legal innovation zone has been mentioned here, but it's worth talking about again, which is, you know, the legal innovation zone is it's grown out of Ryerson. It's a zone in downtown Toronto where companies that are solving legal problems, early stage companies that are solving legal problems, can go to be incubated and to grow their solution, and that's where we've come out of as well. And so there's, you know, there's the support of the government there's the support of law firms who fund it, there's obviously the companies there. So it's all the important facets of society coming together to say, you know, we believe there should be legal innovation and we're going to support it.
So you talked in your presentation about like the kind of training of the software. Can you tell us a little bit more about the process of getting the software up to speed, and how long is that period for like a new user before it becomes really useful to the business?
Yeah, it can actually be no time at all. It depends what you're doing. People find our software incredibly intuitive, and you can essentially just start on day one and it can be useful. But it depends what you're trying to do. So our pre-trained, over 100 pre-trained provisions that it comes with are across sort of general contract provisions, M&A due diligence type provisions, and real estate, so lease review. And so if you're working in any of those sort of areas, this is going to be just immediately helpful, really very, very little startup time needed at all. If you're doing something totally different, you may need to put a little bit of time into training the system, but perhaps not as much as you think.
Okay, so turning more broadly now, so what changes do you see in the market like coming up?
Well, you know, as I mentioned before, I think we're seeing much more awareness now about AI and technology and what it can do. You can barely go to a conference now without AI being, you know, one of the big things that people are talking about. And that was not true a few years ago, as I remember it. And so there's a lot more awareness. There's a lot, and it's not just awareness, and it's not just hype, and it's not just talk. People are actually using it for real practical purposes and getting business value out of that now.
So what areas of law are most amenable to AI?
You know, it's often tasks where computers are very good at sorting through a lot of data to find specific things, and people are not so good at that. So if we're like, you've got 10,000 contracts and you've got an hour to find all the change of control provisions, go. You know, that's a difficult task for a human and a perfectly reasonable task for a machine. You know, and there's of course the flip side. There's tasks that you know, that machine will definitely not be able to do. But in areas where there's you know, a lot of information is sorted through, where there is training data available to teach the system to look for that, those are areas where, and particularly repetitive tasks where it's something you'd be doing over and over, those are great areas for AI and for technology.
So in preparation for today, I looked at some of your writings, and so one of the things you've spoken about or written about is kind of the legal professional responsibility in AI. So what are your thoughts? Do you think that lawyers have now or will have soon in the future the you know, kind of obligation to use AI to satisfy their professional responsibilities?
It's an interesting question, and I think it's one that merits debate. And so perhaps it's a two-part question. If AI is better at certain tasks, and that we can debate that, I think in some very specific use cases, it is certainly, if you work with AI, you'll do a better job than if you don't work with AI. If it is better, do you have a responsibility to do things a better way or not? So let's, you know, when you're very close to it, it's difficult to kind of sort that out. So let's pretend this was in a different industry. Let's say that you needed to have surgery, and you went to a doctor who had, you know, perhaps been a surgeon for decades. They had their own procedures that they liked to do a certain way. And there was new ways of doing that surgery, you know, new ways that had been invented subsequently, but they were like, I'm just not into learning how to do that. I'm going to do it this way. It might have a lower success rate, and you have a slightly higher chance of dying, but this is the way I'm going to do it because I'm not going to learn the new way. You know, you would understandably be outraged in that scenario and think that was unethical because, you know, they're putting you in danger because there's better ways to do this, right? And so now translate that back into law. If there is a better way to do things, do you have to do it the better way for your client? That's the question.
Yeah, let's turn to some audience questions. Dan, it's
Well, yeah, I think you've identified a really important question here, and I think the ethical implications are really interesting. The rules of professional responsibility, the competence rule 1.1, the duty of technological competence under Comment 8. And then you think about Rule 1.5, the requirement that you not bill your client an unreasonable fee. I think it raises a lot of really interesting questions, but the key question becomes, how do we demonstrate that these tools are better? And you're probably familiar with the LogGeek study that came out about a month ago. A lot of people probably saw this, human versus machine, and did this test where you had humans reviewing non-disclosure agreements, trying to flag particular clauses, and then they used their software to flag it. And they were measuring precision and recall and F1 scores, and it turned out that the logging software did better.
Yeah.
So I was kind of curious if you have what you can tell us about any kind of testing you've done on precision, recall, F1 scores, things like that. But then also, to get to this point, what sort of scoring or testing should we be doing to be able to determine that this is better, using these tools is better?
Yeah, great question. So what that study showed is that machines were coming in at about people were coming in at about 85% accuracy on reviewing those NDAs, and the machine at about 95%. I might be off by 1% or 2 there, but it was more or less a 10% difference. So the machine was 10% better more accurate at finding certain things in those documents. So we find that holds true as well with our software, and that's what we tend to hear across the industry. That's about where it's at. And it depends on your human reviewers, are these junior tired people at 4 a.m., or these senior people who do this all the time. Of course there's variables, but that's more or less what we're seeing. And so the conclusion to draw there is if you work with tools, they can help you do the job better than if you work without these tools. And that's not a surprising thing. We use tools for all kinds of things to help us do things better, right? So the question of how do you test this for yourself, your own, so there can be studies out there. You can say, generally it seems to help people do these tasks. How do I know it's going to work for me? One of the things that you can do is you can compare it to, let's say you had a M&A deal that you'd done in the past. It was done, you'd already got the reports, you knew what the outcome was. You knew where all those critical provisions you had to catch were. You can do a comparison. You can have people go in and do the same deal with the software to help you look for all those provisions and contracts, and you can compare it to an already known outcome, and you can have a direct comparison. So that's one way you can do it. Yeah.
So, Laura, you talked about the remarkable pace of change in technology, and that it keeps accelerating. And you use that great example of the numbers and how they build up very quickly. So what does that say in terms of the legal industry's ability to keep pace with the possibilities that technology presents? And isn't there going to be an ever-increasing gap between what's possible and adoption? And what do we do about that?
That's a great question, Mark. I think of times of change call on us to be very flexible. And the more flexible we are, the more successful we're going to be, because we need to adapt to what is possible. And now more than ever. So, I think that certainly if I was a law firm or I was a company with a legal department, I'd be saying, how can we be as flexible as possible? Can we put in the structures to make sure that we are using what is available to do the work the best way we can? And to taking a proactive approach to being as flexible as possible, able to adopt technology as quickly as possible. That would be my orientation. Yeah.
Mr. Cohen's question about how this comes about. You described your law firm associate partner having a problem and postulating that maybe AI could have something to do with it, and then you come to this highly developed tool. In terms of going from problem, I've got a problem, to what might AI be able to do, who needs to be in the room, or what skill sets do you assemble, or mechanically, how do you have that dialogue? I mean, I could participate in half the dialogue, but it's the dialogue, the half that I learned in a place like this. How do you bridge the skill sets gap to do the gap in innovation that Mr. Cohen asked about?
Right. So you're talking about how do you find out if there is an AI solution for a problem that you have? That's a great question. I see a lot of firms now, and this is also sort of somewhat new, was not true certainly 3 or 5 years ago, assembling innovation committees out of people who are interested in the technology, and we'll find, at most firms and most legal teams, there are people who are naturally just incredibly interested in technology and legal tech, will be up to speed, will go to all the conferences, will know what's available. And those people can be incredible resources, if you can find them, incredible resources in terms of telling you what's available, in championing those products and making sure You take it through the process of, looking at the technology, comparing it during the trial, and integrating it into your workflow. So I draw on those people and give them as much power to do as much as possible without a lot of bureaucratic structure, if possible.
So I have used some contract management systems and contract review systems, but largely without AI in them. And I'm curious, so for due diligence, I agree with you that it can catch the abnormal clauses and things like that, but in an in-house setting where you'd also be using it to actually review and negotiate contracts and contract changes, how far can AI go today in actually like programming in or learning business rules where you say, okay, we realize this isn't the greatest clause in an NDA, but it's not something that we would actually spend time negotiating. We can live with this, but we can't live with X. We can live with X, but we can't live with Y. That's a deal breaker. How can AI at this point really learn that and not even then make any attempt really to have you negotiate the clauses that your clients have already told you they have tolerance for from a business risk standpoint?
For most of what you're talking about there, that is still in the human domain. So it's going to help you find particular provisions if you're like, I really need to check up on these few things which we always check for in our contracts. It's going to help you get there in sort of one click and find that information incredibly quickly, or even look across all of these contracts. What are the terms across all of them? It's going to help you do that very quickly, so you're not spending a lot of time on that. And then what that allows you to do, because you're spending less time on just finding what you're looking for, you're going to be able to spend more time really thinking about it. And those areas that really require expertise and judgment and detailed knowledge of how your business works, you can spend your time on that, which is what's really powerful about it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the other thing you can do is just organize the system in a different way. So what you would do is, you have your general training so you know what those clauses mean or those provisions mean. And then you can separate by potential issues and clients. So you can say, hey, whenever we do deals with widget code X, those we always agree to. And you can actually show that via colors. So you can say blue is what we always agree to with these particular folks. Purple we never agree to. Yellow, whatever schema. So you almost use that initial shift, and then you add on just a different layer, but the training remains the same.
So you can actually, you're saying, program in some of that more in a business rule.
Yeah, so you would just, and that's actually very manual, nothing to do with AI on the organization standpoint, because the AI found it, and then what you're doing afterwards is saying, on these matters, these provisions are generally accepted. That's hard programming, that's not AI.
Right.
So it just comes down to organization. But like we were saying, the decision to say yes to a yellow or a purple or a blue or all that is human, and that's why there's never humans outside of the loop with AI. If anything, the interplay makes both get better.
Exactly. Yeah, well said.
Actually, I'm just asking you to comment, Laura, but to the question from the gentleman a couple of questions ago about what are the possibilities within AI. One of the things that I find to be incredibly interesting is to throw this question back to the law firms the way that Ed Walters, the fast case, does and says, here's the sandbox. You cannot mess up too badly, but within these parameters, try it out by yourself and see what the possibilities are. So it actually creates this feedback loop where the law firms can start play with it, and then once they reach their capacity of lawyers not being coders, they can then reach back out to the experts in the industry and say, here's what we think should be possible. Is it possible? So I just want to see if you could comment on that development where the AI is going.
I think that's a great point, and that's exactly where we need to be, where we're having lots of really good conversations between the people who build technology and the people who use the technology. And at that intersection, that's where we're going to have some really great ideas. We need to keep having that conversation about what would be so great if it was possible with the people who can perhaps build it, help shape it.
Can I pivot from the AI in its use in assistance for lawyers, client service, advocacy, and the like, to decision making? So you know, what Richard Susskind and others have been working on for years and years and years, right? Which is the utility, and OADR and other developments, utility of AI present and in the future to actually replace or augment human decision-making, where the decisions are actually decisions that adjudicators have traditionally made, mediators have traditionally made. Is that, I mean, that's, of course, about the debate about expert systems. And expert systems can help in the development of, you know, of lawyers' utility. But do you really think it can help us and ought it to help us in reducing the human in, you know, in actually making decisions that involve law, right? So what a judge would do, what an agency would do.
I think what we'll see is we'll see the way we think of what is human work evolving. And that has actually always been the case. You know, there's things that we used to all do manually that we don't do anymore, and machines do them. And we, you know, our definition of what human work has just shifted in concert with that. And every time that happens, every time, you know, machines do help us do some of the more routine tasks, it gives us more time to go invent all kinds of amazing other things. And I think that's what we'll see. So I don't think the way to think about it's tempting to think about it as a finite pie. So this is how much stuff there is to do in law, and if the machines do the stuff, we don't do the stuff. You know, I think that's not the way to think about it. As machines do some of those time-consuming, repetitive, you know, boring things for us, we'll be able to solve all kinds of other problems. And you know, it's not like in any field of human endeavor, we can say we are perfect, we've solved all of the problems, we don't need any more time to solve our problems. You know, so I think, for example, the access to justice issue in law. You know, as we have machines doing some of the repetitive tasks that we don't need to do, can we put our minds to making sure that more people have access to justice, for example?
Can I press on that? So much of the focus on access to justice is finding legal services and legal advice and representation, no doubt about it, the 80% figure. Some of the problems of access to justice in the US and elsewhere is the overload and casework of administrative adjudicators. The vast majority, right, of legal decision-making in all of our systems is not in the judge or at the trial court. It's in administrative adjudication. It's welfare benefits. It's immigration, all of that. So one of the promises, certainly as OADR show us, is the prospect that through AI-enabled services, we can actually not just engage in more efficient decision-making, but better decision-making. After all, the conversation about expert systems may well jive exactly with this tradition that, you know, goes back to Weber and even before, right? Is the notion of introducing expertise. If you get that holy grail of expertise, then you reduce human decision-making with all its biases, with all its prejudice, with all its, you know, the judge decides based on what he had for breakfast, etc. So I wonder whether you're under-ambitious in some sense in predicting a world in which many aspects of legal decision-making, resolution of disputes, could actually be handled by AI-enabled decision-making.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and I think, you know, areas of the legal system where there's, you know, enormous backlog and just not enough people to address, you know, legal problems, we could see that some of those decisions could be made by AI systems, where it's a very, you know, perhaps first of all it will be the simpler decisions that need to be made, where there's a lot of known facts and it's essentially a decision-making tree, and AI could make that decision. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if AI starts to make some of the, you know, some of the more sophisticated decisions. And then it becomes, you know, the next interesting question that usually follows that one is, how do we make sure that AI doesn't contain biases of its own? And how do we not introduce that to it? And my answer to that would be, you know, as of right now, AI does not have its own opinions. It is, you know, its viewpoint, if we put it that way, which is not quite right, is shaped by the data we feed it. So we've got to make sure that our biases aren't in that data, because that data is what trains the AI and determines the way that it's going to be making decisions.
So did you say the bias is not in the algorithm, but in the data?
Yes.
I would challenge that.
Okay.
I would challenge that, because what the algorithm
Yeah, well, there's a distinction here because the data, and when we say algorithm, I think that's already an issue. You know, these systems use hundreds, if not thousands, of different algorithms all at once. So the idea of an algorithm is already kind of getting a bit outdated from previous understandings. Also using techniques like deep learning, et cetera, those images, when the machine looks at different points of information, it starts drawing conclusions that wasn't manually put in by a human being. So it actually, you know, with the dog and the bagel issue, it's a data issue. Because with enough photos of the bagel and a dog, it's gonna learn the distinction between the two of them. So the issue that when it comes to the judge and the information, the factors that those systems will look at are anything that judges have used in the past to make those decisions. Therefore, what Laura's saying too is that it becomes a data issue because we use past data to inform these systems which will continue to operate either using some of the similar problems and biases that went into sentencing in the past.
But that'll improve, right, that's
But that's
intrinsic.
exactly.
But the idea is 20 years from now, it'll be a combination of all those decisions, which are fixed
Yes.
data points, but improved through
Yeah.
decision-making.
And the other thing is, you know, if you look at Netflix where they had to make a documentary on what the problems with the systems are in the United States, these systems will be able to find those anomalies without a Netflix documentary being made, because you can just ask the system, how are Hispanic female offenders sentenced ba-da-da, 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 versus X, Y, or Z, and you'll get that information instantly, whereas the process, but now is a lot of manual, which is resource heavy. So these systems can then be used to shine a light on bias themselves.
I was sort of wondering, in terms of different possibilities of this, now that you've sort of developed the tool and commercialized it, if you're sort of speaking to other legal tech companies or sort of thinking about different opportunities that you can use this tool for, whether it's sort of augmenting, creating sort of a more comprehensive contract solution, or just sort of what conversations you're having in that respect.
Well, something which we announced a week or two ago was that we now have an API available, so people can actually use our sort of clause extraction engine and build it into their own platform. So that's something which we are having quite a few conversations around, as other legal tech companies are interested in using our engine to power sort of related use cases. Yeah.
You mentioned in one of the earlier slides that one of the problems of the AI product is it actually becomes more powerful as more people use it. And you mentioned your product actually lawyers can train the model with the customized their needs. So my question is two parts. One is, do you do that across firms or lawyers? Like, do you share one lawyer's customization with the other? And the second part is, if you do, how do you handle the issues of confidentiality, privacy, or competitiveness?
We don't. We don't share them. So, you know, once your system with your firm, anything you train stays on your system and doesn't go to anyone else.
So you're sort of not really going the full distance in terms of the AI sharing.
Well, the way it works is the pre-built clauses, the over 100 pre-built clauses that we have, you can opt in to keep correcting it if you want. The way that we find we get that question a lot, and most people want to get the benefits of having the training from other people without contributing. So we've thought about making it like you can opt in, but then you get and you give, you know. But at the moment it works that you can participate and continue to give feedback to all of our existing algorithms. When you train your own, it's yours on your system. But you know, that's not necessarily one person. You could have a firm with, you know, a dozen offices, and when you train it to recognize a certain concept, all your colleagues at all those offices are reaping the benefits. And as you all correct it, you're all reaping the benefits of having that algorithm, that machine learning model be more accurate. So in that kind of microcosm, the more you use it, the more use you get out of it. For that firm, yes. Yeah.
How often do you find that the 100 pre-recognized clauses are sufficient for your clients? Is it 50% of the time, 80%, 10%? I mean, how useful are they to people practically?
Very useful. You know, it's pretty comprehensive in those areas of M&A due diligence and real estate. And if you want to use it for other things, you can easily train it. So I think most clients will heavily use what's there and then develop a few of their own clauses. We certainly have people who want to use it for something quite different, and will do a lot of training. But it's very flexible. Yeah.
Which area of law is most used for AI?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Which part of law is most useful as compared to the other field of these sections of the law?
In what area of law is AI most useful? So I think there's a few use cases in which it's proving extremely useful, and contract analysis is certainly one of those. It's widely accepted that it's really helpful in that particular area. And I'll let Andrew talk to his own area very shortly. But again, it's those areas where you've got perhaps repetitive tasks that you're doing a lot of, that the machine can take off your plate. When you're talking about tasks that are one-off, require nuance and complexity, involve human interaction, or very specific expertise, those sometimes don't lend themselves well to AI systems.
Okay, so I think we're out of time. Please join me in thanking Laura.
Okay, so our next speaker is Andrew Arruda. I will just make it short. I'll give you two guesses who he works with. Andrew is a guy who I think is very also emblematic of what's going on. People under 30, used to be law was very much hierarchical. You had to sort of wait your turn. And I think Andrew just shows you, and Laura and other people like that around the world, who really have the smarts and have the guts, to step up and really contribute, and they're making a huge impact in terms of the delivery of legal systems services. So hats off to the younger generation who are clearly starting to play a huge role. So without further ado, I'll just say that Andrew is a co-founder and CEO of Ross. He's going to talk to us, I'm sure, about what he's doing. He may yet give one more shout out to Toronto, which is well deserved. And Andrew's moderator is a person on our law faculty, Sarah. And Sarah, I'm sure, is going to ask Andrew some probing questions.
I actually think we're on the same page, so.
Stay tuned.
Okay. Anyway, without further ado, Andrew Arruda.
Thank you, Mark. Mark's always been someone I basically kind of like ships passing in the night on Twitter and whatnot. If I go to an event, that means he was there the day before or he's there the day after. So you are here physically, and I was worried that you weren't.
This is my avatar.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I actually am not really going to be talking about artificial intelligence. I'm actually going to be looking at some other things, and you're going to, I think, enjoy, and I hope you will. If you do enjoy what I'm saying and you're following along on Twitter, I'm at Andrew Arruda. If you don't, it's at Andu Arruda. So, first, before I get started, I want to give a couple shout outs. One to Casey Flaherty. He wrote a piece about something called the Magic Money Machine, and I think you'll note why I'm giving him a shout out on that. And then Alexis Chun, who I actually met in Singapore. She's doing amazing things with legalese. She had just the most incredible visual presentation I've seen done, and it used kind of this highlighting type methods and GIFs. And today is going to be very GIF heavy, so get ready for that. The first thing I want to talk about is a machine that prints money. I mean, I know right now you might think, hey, Andrew, there's no such thing, but we're going to imagine for a moment we've all invented, the great minds in this very room invented a machine that prints money. Prints $10 US bills. Let's add a cap to it. It's not infinite, but it's whatever in your head is a good amount of money that anyone would want to own this type of machine. The cost for it is fair. It makes sense to purchase it. It prints money. Now, how would a legal organization go about purchasing this machine? And actually, this is something that I used as a thought experiment because it really helps me understand what the process is at whatever organization I'm at. So I said, ideally, obviously, and I'm going to touch on this, there's no such thing as this machine, but let's pretend we have it. How long would it take? Who's going to be involved in this purchase? And how long from the moment you've seen it and it's proven to purchase will there be? So as I mentioned, I use this as a way to probe into and get these answers to this question because I think it's important. Okay, so obviously the results vary. But the answer to this question is usually a few months, maybe even half a year. And that's for a machine that has been proven to print money. And by way of the thought experiment, it's perfect. And people accept that premise, which I know is a crazy premise to accept. The question is, why is that? Now, I obviously know that the easy answer that anyone would give, well, Andrew, law firms are complex, in-house teams are complex. It's not like they're going to purchase it right then and there. I understand that, and I will totally agree that yes, legal organizations have complex processes. But it seems to me, time and after time, after discussing this very thought experiment with folks from other industries outside of legal, the results that I typically got back were much shorter. The conversations were much clearer in that they'd say, yes, you have to go through these 4 people, this happens, the purchase is made X amount of time, this is the contract, and there's a set process. What it suggested to me is that legal organizations aren't necessarily built to purchase technology. It's not something that we've had to do, and there's been multiple presentations so far which highlighted the fact that there's this new need for technology, whereas in the past we haven't needed it before. There was talk about why do you need product management in law? And that's because we now face a time where there's not as much abundancy of resources. You can't just send out your bill and say for services rendered X amount and get away with that. And so just like anyone who's been in a situation where resources are not as available, you have to start managing what you're doing. So think about you have water, you're in the desert, all of a sudden it's going to become super important to do that. And technology is playing a role. And again, this presentation isn't going to be all doom and gloom, much like John Fernandez mentioned. I'm an optimist and we're going to get there. But I think instead of us always concentrating on talking about the technology, the benefits of the technology, et cetera, I wanted to spend with everyone here an examination of some of the issues that I continue to see. Now, who here is familiar with the concept of bike shedding? Okay, good. So we'll all learn something today. So the bike shed example is when really intelligent people are asked to make a decision about something that they don't necessarily know anything about. So the example is there's a big nuclear facility that's going to be put up somewhere. It's a very complex nuclear fusion. I don't know enough about it. But they have all these mines, they're sitting around a table, and instead of talking about the safety aspects of the nuclear division, what they end up talking about is where are you going to put the bike shed that's going to store the employees' bikes. And people have a ton of it, that's where they feel comfortable, so that's where they're going to go. They're going to say, hey, well, how many employees do we have? What kind of bikes are they riding? Is it mountain bikes? I don't know. And the decision to make that bike shed decision ends up being much larger because that's what they feel comfortable talking about. So let's go back to that machine. Maybe this is, I think, what generally might happen. Why does it only print $20 bills? I need it to print other things. Well, we always have to try it for free. We need to get sign off from 9 people, but they only meet once every 4 years. And my favorite in the American context is we would definitely purchase if it printed euros. If I showed up in Germany, they might say if it printed USD. And the thing is, and why this is a problem, is because there is no such thing as a magic money machine. Okay? So the question becomes, how do you sell legal technology? Right? How do you? And you can. So again, the situation's not dire. But I do want to go through so that I can benefit the community at large some of the biggest challenges that I see, and a lot of them we've already discussed in this forum over the last day or two. So the first one, obviously, is the billable hour structure. So you're at odds with the fact that you bill by the hour, so the longer it takes you to do a task, the more money you make. And what really is the problem with the billable hour structure is not necessarily the structure itself, but the fact that it really should be named, as long as I can get away with billing you for that, then I will continue to charge you for that. And so, what we're now seeing, which is fabulous, is coming out of 2008, and I do love the Georgetown report, although Marcus did a pretty amazing job using data first and showing how there might be some problems with it. But one thing it shows, which I think is undeniable, is that move away from the billable hour structure to fixed fees, et cetera. So like I said, not all this is grim, but I want to go through each one. This one is massive, the partnership structure, because you're asking individuals to take money out of their pocket today to buy technology that will benefit future generations and cut into their profits. The other issue with this is if you're measuring profit per partner and you're making large-scale R&D payments into technology, that's an issue. So you have to ask yourself, why do these massive law firms, which do billions of dollars in business, not have an R&D department? That's something that every other organization has. So if you can't prepare for your future and pay for your future, you end up getting what you get. This isn't anyone's fault too. A lot of the time, a lot of the challenges you face is it's the first time those organizations are getting out and being innovative. So there is no process in place, so you have to kind of blaze the path and get it done, which again, like I said, is not anyone's fault. This one's a really big one, and this has been mentioned multiple times, and I greedily asked a question on day one about minimum viable products and building from there. The problem is, because of the nature of our work, which is very important and we can't make mistakes, we need our technology to perform at certain levels, which is completely fair. The problem is it becomes kind of a catch-22, where in order to build out the best technology, you need to understand from individuals what do you want folks to build. And therefore, it's this problem where, hey, unless the technology is perfect, which again, there's no such thing as perfect technology, you wind into this big kind of back and forth, and so you end up, and lawyers end up using outdated technology because it's already been vetted and it's fair. That you never get fired with going with IBM, and that's what they end up going with. Here's the other thing, and this is not a bad thing. This is very normal. Some of the technology isn't the greatest, and that isn't anyone's fault when it comes to being a lawyer, but this is something that we all have to recognize as well. And so the problem that I find, especially in our industry where you kind of borrow from law, there's this idea where you can't talk about failure, and you can't talk about some things working and some things not working. Along the way, we're going to build things that aren't always the best. And we heard great examples from yesterday about how when you go through those, you learn from that and you continue forward. So this is certainly a factor as well. Another factor, obviously, is that folks can be scared of change. Now, when I say scared of change, again, this is something that I think lawyers get built up into this mythical creature. It's impossible to sell technology because they can't fathom change. They can. I'm scared of change personally, and I'm an entrepreneur. I walk the same route to work when I'm in San Francisco every day, even though I've optimized it and I've seen that I actually could take another route that might be quicker and maybe even more scenic. But that was the route that I walked the first day I moved into my new apartment, and that's the way I walk to work. And so I think it's almost unfair sometimes to only put in lawyers into this bucket where they're scared of change. However, I do still think being scared of change is one of the problems that we're facing as an industry when it comes to these new technologies. So putting a name on these problems, I hope we then can foster discussion. And obviously, to give you a little bit of what I'm going to do at the end is really a call to all of you to see and have a discussion as to how we can kind of solve or aim to solve some of these issues. This, I think, is a major factor. As lawyers, we get paid to avoid risk. So that's why people, when I was an attorney, people came to my office, hey, and what do they ask? This is what's going on in my life. This is what my business issue is. What can go wrong? And so that's what you get paid to do. That's what you learn to do. What do you do in law school? Issue spotting. That's an issue. That's an issue. That's an issue. Now the problem is when you try to go and say, hey, maybe you're doing something internally at your firm, internally at the law school, and you say, hey, let's try this new way of doing something. The problem with doing that is no one's done it before, which inherently means there's a bunch of risks, both known and unknown, that can occur. And so it almost seems we're asking individuals to change entirely what they've benefited from doing all of a sudden in this kind of new age with all these new pressures to adapt and change with legal technology. This one's the one that I think not enough people talk about when it comes to big law firms in particular. You can sell a piece of technology, or a law firm can get behind a particular piece of technology. but it has, say, 12, 19, 25 offices. Whichever practice area, or maybe it's across all practice areas your technology operates within, you're going to have to deal with different pockets and different cultures. So in effect, say that Dan is leading the Chicago office, him and his team. Dan's always been really, forward-thinking and, gung-ho about this problem. They're doing, great. But the New Orleans office, someone there just is stuck in their old ways, and it's not working out. And so one time, and we've heard this concept at these last 2 days all the time, is when we talk about law firms, we almost talk about them as one unified thing, but in reality, there are obviously different pockets, and that's an issue that we have to face. This one's a great one. Just our high level of skepticism, which again is what we get paid to do. But again, when it comes to legal innovation, entrepreneurship, or even adopting and changing with new technologies, it can be hard for individuals to get over that leap and their initial points of skepticism. And this one I don't think you can go without saying as well. There's multiple ethical considerations when it comes to the different issues facing us adopting and using technology. So when you talk about artificial intelligence, there was a question asked earlier, do you share the training between that one tool with other law firms? And where does that leave us ethically? If I use this or if I don't use this. So it's not just like you can unwrap new technology and get started using it, because there are ethical considerations that we as an industry have to go through. But the question becomes, why am I talking about this at all? I'm talking about this because I really feel that over the past 2-3 years, I've been able to travel the world and talk to all these different great innovative communities. But oftentimes we end up talking about the problems that we're facing over here when we're not actually talking about some of the problems that actually are the real source of those issues. And so what I wanted to do at this conference, because of the great lineup of folks and because of the great lineup of speakers, is actually almost come with questions myself. Asking myself, how can we change these things? And that's why I want to have a pretty spirited discussion. Because I think that we can talk about, AI, new forms of doing technology, the latest and greatest widget, but that until we deal with these cultural challenges, or at least, give them names and have conversations about them, what's going to end up is we're not actually going to be as successful as we can be. And what we may end up doing is adopting and changing in such small increments that becomes an issue. Now, Uber was mentioned as this kind of disrupting force. And it certainly was. And one thing that I consistently have heard as an entrepreneur in this space is, Andrew, why are you working with the law firms? Why are you working with in-house teams? Why are you working with law schools? Don't you know, Andrew, that if you're really going to change this industry, you have to do what always happened. You have to go around those institutions, and you have to force them to change by inventing something outside the confines of that industry. That's what I always hear as an entrepreneur. And what I reply is, I don't think they understand that we, as a legal community, are not averse to change, et cetera, but there are going to be some challenges we have to get through to get there. And I do think that if we're really going to change our industry, the change should and has to come from within, because we're trained in a manner which I think is of a huge benefit. So when you think about those apps and those different things where folks just distribute it and get it direct to consumer, sure, some of that I think makes a lot of sense. But I do think that having lawyers at the center and solving these legal issues is what we need. So in order to solve these issues, I actually think we don't just need more technology, I think we need more lawyers. And I think those lawyers need to be equipped, and maybe they won't be getting paid, as we heard earlier, or those legal professionals, variations of that, they won't get paid the same amount of money, but they're going to be out there and solving issues. So I continuously get asked to go to different events, and obviously, I've made my name in talking about artificial intelligence, and this is a variation on the dog and the bagel issue. This is if it's a chihuahua or a muffin. Not something you want to make a mistake on. But I think what I wanted to focus on in this particular presentation is how we really shouldn't and we can talk about that. But I think I'm also excited about us sitting down and talking about process mapping, or if you're in Canada, process mapping. And I'm not getting paid by Post-it notes, but that's what I think is some of the most powerful technology is a piece of paper and a pen. And until we get it right with a piece of paper and a pen, and have conversations about, okay, well, this is a new form of technology, or this is a new way of doing things. If this works out, what is going to happen? What are the consequences of it? Because it's almost like we have an issue in our industry where it's like, what if the dog catches the car? And that's, I think we're at this point. You know, Laura did a great job in talking about, no, there is these proof points that these systems can help us. And then rightfully so, people ask them, why isn't it all happening? Because there's these systemic issues that I think are holding that back. And once we get that right, I think things are really going to click and we truly enter the age of the legal entrepreneur. And I think we are in that age, and it's beginning to happen because of all the change that we're hearing. And if you notice the themes and how this conference opened up to begin with, what did we open up with? Legal entrepreneurship, but culture. And I didn't know, what other individuals and what other speakers would be talking about at this conference. But as I sat over there watching everyone stand up and go, I thought, wow, this is perfect, because I think I can actually end up and tie this all together in my presentation, and this was not planned. So I think we have to let's go through what's going on. I think we have to acknowledge the fact, and it's not a bad thing, like I'm not calling anyone out, but the truth is, lawyers are still using WordPerfect. The truth is, when I told the team and the engineering team at Ross Intelligence, hey, you have to optimize our platform for the oldest forms of Internet Explorer, that's a true thing. And then the question becomes, hey, but Andrew, you have this gadget, it's artificial intelligence, and it works in health and it works in finance. It's going to do everything in law. But the point is, artificial intelligence is not going to save us from these hundreds of years of the way that we've kind of crafted our culture. And it's, again, this isn't an indictment, it's not a problem, but I think we have to talk about it, because the first step, with the grief cycle, yeah, there he is, Mr. Peters, you got to accept that, right? And then as we heard, if we accept this, my hope is that we're going to go through these phases a lot quicker, because entrepreneurs like Laura and her team, like what's going on, I'm going to give a shout out to Toronto, but across the world, Singapore, Germany, Hong Kong, Australia, England, etc. There's fabulous tools being crafted right now by these entrepreneurs who want to help, but I think we're not having enough of a conversation about the fundamental issues, and I think I want to devote some more of my time on that. The truth is, and I think we need to stop looking at legal technology as a silver bullet that's going to fix all of our problems. Because when you do that, you end up thinking to yourself, all of a sudden, all I have to do is get that new technology that helps me with my timekeeping, and that's going to make me innovative. Law firm needs to be innovative. We're going to go ahead and we're going to trial, not purchase, this technology, and now we're innovative. A law school can appoint someone with a title about innovation, and all of a sudden, that's innovation, right? Innovation is ugly, it's hard, you get your hands dirty, and you learn. You take risks, and you work as a team. And I think what we need to realize is that, we talk about these problems that we face as a community as if it's something new. This is something that, it's not our fault, it's our time now as a community. In finance and health, these things happened just earlier. I always thought of law like the Wizard of Oz. When I was, in law school, it was all kind of this magic. And you go up to a beautiful, castle, and there's, smoke, and you say, these are my legal issues. And then all of a sudden a voice says, you have to file this, and you have to do that. And you say, okay. And then you say, what do I do now? And they say, pay X amount of dollars on the way out. And you're walking out, but what happened was the sheet has come down in many ways. And what's behind that? Same thing in The Wizard of Oz, an old white man. But that is something that's happening, and that sheet's coming down. And I think they're all interrelated, but I think to put the pressure in many ways on the legal tech community to solve legal innovation is not fair. Just like I think it's not about what do we have to do as law schools to change things. I felt bad for a lot of the folks in the faculty here over the last few days, because anytime we came up to an issue, what did we say? Law school should teach that. But I think it's a joint effort, because our issues actually, and we heard this already, and like I said, this wasn't planned, our issues have nothing to do with technology. Our issues are attitudinal, and we can change these things, and we have to see the benefit of that. But first, we have to address those issues. So you've got to ask yourself one question. What are you going to do about it? And I think it might seem kind of corny for me to ask this question, but we are at Northwestern Law School. And I'm not just saying this, it's just data. One of the best law schools in the world. We have the best legal thought leaders in this room across many different verticals. We have innovative law schools. We have innovative in-house teams with the GC. As a matter of fact, the titles that we've heard from so far in this conference have been CEO, Executive Director, CIO, GC, Dean, Founder, CEO, Director, Co-Founder, CEO, Director. That's why yesterday I wanted to make sure I was well represented. I put on a colored shirt. It's a big deal. But if we can't all figure this out, then where is it going to come from? So we can't just talk about legal innovation. We have to start doing these things, and we have to start working as a global community. So I think that an event like this is so important, because even on the live stream, this is about us being able to change everything and act as change agents individually, but on a global scale, because together we can share what works and what doesn't. What's happening in Germany is important for what's happening here. What's happening in Singapore is important for what's happening here. What's happening in Mexico is important for what's happening here. And the idea that we can live in our silos is not going to work. What's happening in Canada matters, you see? But it matters for all of us. It's not a Canada, US, Mexico, Singapore thing. It's an all thing. And so when we, in order to actually do this, have to collaborate, and we can actually suffer from the same sins as the industry we're trying to change. So what does that look like? No diversity. Okay, we got to change that. What does that look like? Attitudes where, you know, you have to be X amount of, you must be this old to ride this ride. You know, that's already happening in legal technology, but there's still issues there too. You know, what law school did you go to? You know, what about this? What about that? We need to become a culture and an industry which cares about what you produce and what we're doing. And we have to hold people accountable and just say, hey, you can speak about this stuff, but let's all, like, how can I help you do something? The thing is, like I said, what we're doing is very important, and I feel like we all should feel very excited. Because, you know, yes, there's a challenge. Yes, absolutely, a massive challenge. But we all now get to be part of this amazing community that can change the way the very course of history goes. Now, I know that I sound over the top because that's what I do. I'm an Aries. I don't know if that is even a thing. But, you know, but here's the thing. You know, we have gathered the world's best minds. Each one of you took time out of all your busy schedules to be here. There's no one else who cares about this stuff. So we can't just say, hey, you know what, someone else is going to do this. Someone else is going to do this. We're going to have to do this. And I think now the level of what it counts to actually be making a change in our industry has been risen. So it's not just enough to have a website with a picture of, you know, a black person, a Hispanic person, a female, etc., and say that's a diverse organization. Okay, there needs to be more there. It's not enough to just say innovation with a cool picture of a microchip on your website, and that's it. The industry and our other industries that we're serving our clients are changing, and we have to change. And like I said, we really do have to figure this out. And it doesn't mean there's a method that we might not know it. So as you can see here, this baby is really smart. And this is the fun. And this is the fun. This is the fun of innovation. This is the fun of innovation. We have to think outside of the box. You know, when you get asked questions, what does the world look like in 5, 10 years? People ask me that. I actually don't know, because before the iPhone came out, before smartphones came out, if you met someone that would have given you spot-on predictions of technology and large technology companies in the next 5 to 10 years, the year before the iPhone came out, they would be a trillionaire, because it changed everything so fundamentally that there's no way of knowing what's going to happen. And we can all play a part in that, and each one of you come from various other communities, and you are the people who will be the folks, if you want to, cause and be part of this change. It's important we do this because there is no such thing as a magic money machine. And what I mean by that is there's no whiz-bang tool that's going to come out and solve things. You know, the Holy Grail that we talked about earlier. This is going to cause, and you're going to have your place for the legal educators, you're going to have your place for the in-house teams, the legal entrepreneurs, the technologists. We all play a role in this, and it's not just one or the other, but we all have to learn how to play nice. Because if we're waiting for technology to save us, it won't. We have to save ourselves from, you know, some of the issues we face, but with that comes tremendous opportunity. So like I said, I wanted to have some conversation and a discussion, so I'll pause there, and thank you very much.
I don't want to take up too much time because I think actually probably the most
Yeah.
useful thing would be to hear from folks here. But one problem, perhaps, a money machine would be useful because you get money that you can spend on anything.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to identify your problem before a money machine is useful.
Correct.
But before you can go after the latest technology, right? The greatest example of this is, I mean, the current example of this might be like blockchain, right? Blockchain is great, and we're going to use it for everything, right? But what is the problem that you're solving? What is the question that you're asking for which blockchain is the answer, right?
Correct.
If the question is, how do I buy a large amount of illegal drugs without being traced, then maybe blockchain is your answer.
Maybe.
But maybe.
I wouldn't know anything about that, so
I
you
don't know anything about that either.
It seemed like you had some experience.
But if your question is, how do I track what vegetables are being grown, then maybe blockchain isn't your answer.
Correct.
So to look at the answers first before you have a good grasp on the questions, even if you're willing to accept the answers, if you don't know what they're the answer to, you're going to throw up your hands in frustration and say, this technology isn't helping me.
100%.
I adopted the technology and now it's not helping.
Exactly.
But identifying the problems facing an industry is a very hard challenge. That in fact, technology is not going to give us a lot of help with that problem. I mean, they're on the margins, it can, but you have to have a deep understanding of the industry and a willingness to ruthlessly look at what you're doing and think about ways to improve. So that strikes me as another challenge that before technology has tremendous potential, but the most potential when it is addressing problems that we really struggle with.
And on that note, that's why I called it Post-it notes, WordPerfect artificial intelligence, because I think you got to start with the Post-it notes. And you got to lay out your process mapping, and you got to say, what technology works at which point. And maybe blockchain works for some things. Maybe AI works for some things. Maybe other things work for other things. But I think we get excited. But we also, I think the other thing about Post-it notes that I was trying to say is that Post-it notes also means we, instead of, if I'm going to go out and make a buying decision, I need to understand what I expect to happen. And if I show up at a car dealership with no intent to actually purchase a vehicle, then that doesn't make sense as well. So you can't just show up and be like, I heard that you guys have a new automobile, and show it to me and everything's going to be fixed. So I think the Post-it notes were important. And then the WordPerfect, what I meant by that is this isn't a slight on WordPerfect. I had to use it when I was an attorney. It's functional. But my point is sometimes
WordPerfect has reveal code.
Yeah.
WordPerfect is actually great. The only problem is that they didn't keep it updated. That's a separate issue, though. We're not going to talk about that.
The WordPerfect law, we got you. But my point with WordPerfect was, look, my point wasn't, there's Google Documents or Living Documents would probably do a much better job with that. So I actually don't think we should still be using that. And then artificial intelligence marked what I was really talking about, the future of what we're up to. And so I think we can't just jump into things, and I think sometimes we do, because I think we've become, we're almost like, I'm a Toronto Maple Leafs hockey fan, and every year is the year we're going to win the Stanley Cup. And I think what we don't want to do is throw up this kind of Hail Mary shot with any technology and say, this is going to be the thing that solves everything, because it's not. And I think it does more harm than good.
And I would just make one other comment before that I'll turn it, which is, and the other issue which relates to all the points that you were making before is that, in fact, law firms already have available to them a huge amount of technology, incredibly powerful technology that is sitting on people's computers, even in the form of, say, Excel or other things.
100%.
And with no idea of how to use it.
And so Casey Flaherty, who I opened up with, I think does a really fabulous job talking about how he does technology tests for Excel and Word or whatnot. And that's an issue too. But the issue isn't the fact that we're going to go say Microsoft doesn't make sense. The issue is that the lawyers and the processes by which we distribute technology in our industry are not up to snuff and have to change. So I do think it's not about throwing out old tools. I think artificial intelligence, the analogy that I like to use is that it's a chainsaw. It's a chainsaw and you're giving it to a lumberjack. But sometimes it makes sense to use a chainsaw, but other times for a smaller tree it might not make sense. So you don't throw out your old tools based off of the new tools. And a lot of the time these new tools are doing things that those old tools weren't even doing at all. And so it's apples and oranges sometimes, and I think that's another thing when it comes to what do we do now with all this new stuff. I can't keep up to date with it. It's like step back. What do you do in your day-to-day job?
Exactly.
Use resources. The ABA has websites. Law schools have websites. A lot of people have websites. And then I think it's a call to action to our community to ask questions about like what happens when the dog catches the car. So if this is successful, what does implementation look like, et cetera? Because it seems that we're at a point where because one of the issues I mentioned was first time being innovative, people don't know. And lawyers are missing out on using tools that do a better job for their client overall, based off of things that are actually not necessarily just their fault. But the problem is it's no one's fault. So it's no one's fault and nothing happens.
And all those issues you talked about, the 10 points you
Yeah.
started with, I would suggest you don't even have to look to adoptions of new technologies that entrepreneurs are bringing up. You can see that resistance as people put things on a list instead of a spreadsheet from which they can generate a pivot table
or have their
like that.
assistant print out emails because
Exactly.
they won't look at emails.
Exactly. So
that
we certainly
happens a lot.
we certainly see that. But Mark, go ahead. Yeah.
So, first of all, Andrew, great presentation, and I especially love the fact that you, as a technologist, are stepping back and asking us to consider the larger questions, right? So some of those questions are, our culture. How are we going to change our culture? And if I hear one more, legal innovator or legal pioneer, it's really challenging my gag reflex. And I think what's important is, Sarah, you just nailed it right on the head when you said, it depends on what kinds of problems you're seeking to solve, right? And so going back a step to culture, I think what we as a profession, if we want to stay relevant, and not just be gobbled up by the industry, I think we have to ask the question, what is legal culture today? Given the new tools that are available and given the things that we've historically done well, but clearly listening to all the static and having to, I think, be realistic about things that need a lot of improvement, like access to justice, like really low net promoter score on the part of our clients. And I think if we really want to get serious, to your point, Andrew, is I think we have to have a serious discussion about what is legal culture. And it's not just about managing partners, it's not just about people of my age, it's about the entire legal community and the entire legal ecosystem that has to have a real heart-to-heart. And so I really applaud what you're saying, and Sarah, one more time with feeling, totally agree with you, because culture is really nothing more than how do we define ourselves? Yeah. What is important to us? These are not just buzzwords. These are things that you live by,
100%.
And so I think we really got to get serious about that.
I think what I see sometimes is because they're, it's not as dire as maybe some of the headlines, and Mark did a great job kind of describing that in terms of the change, but all industries are going through tremendous change, and I think sometimes what I see is this tendency for us to just grab whatever's around us and run outside and I'm going to go do something. Right. But what I'm saying is let's pause and talk to each other and come up with a plan and say how are we going to do this and what can we work together to get this done.
Yeah, and I just have a question for you to follow up if I may, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to take too much time. When I first saw your first slide of the money machine, my first thought was, oh, he's going to riff about sort of the current legal system, right? Because let's be honest about it, law has become a little bit of a money machine for certain people, and that's not an indictment. It's not saying they're not. I was a beneficiary of it for many, many years. But I think that one of the things we're going to have to grapple with is it's going to be very hard because the people currently in power, whether it's a GC, whether it's a managing partner, whether frankly it's tenured faculty at a legal academy, these are the people who are the beneficiaries of what has been, and now we're talking about not disrupting the apple cart, but certainly changing it. How do you propose that we really get the people who can make the difference?
I think we have to sit down and have a conversation with them. And I feel like sometimes we don't, and I was guilty of this myself. A lot of the things that I'm talking about, I'm not saying that myself was perfect at any of this as well, but I think we just have to have venues and conversations like this, and that's why I chose to present on this topic, was so that we could have this conversation. I think it's actually not more complicated than that, because what I think happens with us, and even the way that everything works, is the folks who think one way show up at the same events, and we talk about the same things all the time, and we all get it. But how do we get more people who I haven't seen before at any of these events? Or how do we get the people who make these decisions at these firms at these events? And yeah, I know it seems like a very hard task to do. Andrew, I've been doing it for X amount of years, blah, blah, blah. But that's no reason to give up. And I do think that there are a lot of changes in the marketplace right now where clients have pushed back that we can use as a kind of a crowbar. I think artificial intelligence has been really fabulous because it actually sparked discussions of legal innovation generally. Folks now, when they talk about AI, when they talk to Ross Intelligence, they'll ask us, hey, can you build X, Y, and Z? And it has nothing to do with AI. But the fact is, artificial intelligence has led to this conversation about legal innovation in general, and I think that's been a fabulous thing. But I think, to answer your question directly, Mark, what do we do? I think obviously it's about getting people involved in the conversation, and I do think that it's the same thing we've seen, and I'm not going to get political or anything, but just generally in society, we're more connected via our devices, et cetera, but we connect to people within our own mindset, and we have to break that because what you have on your Twitter algorithm where you look through is going to be different than someone who's not at this conference. And how do we get that same kind of alignment, and how do we get them excited about these changes? When you show someone that you can do your job better, that you can do best by your client, they want that. No one's saying they don't, but how do we deliver that message? We heard about scaring people. That happens so much with these headlines. It's here to replace everyone. That's not the case. But I think it's on all of us, and we as a community have some work to do. But I think if we're really going to make the leap, that pattern of adoption, technology adoption, I gave a talk in Singapore not too long ago where I said we as a community are crossing the chasm. If anyone knows that analogy. We as a community are going mainstream. But if we're going to go mainstream and actually have there's been decades of work in this field by some of the people in this room who've been working tirelessly. Right now is the most critical juncture because we as a community are crossing that chasm and we're going mainstream. And so we need to double down our efforts to ensure that we get not just the early adopters and those other individuals, but talk to what's the laggards in that curve. Because guess what? It's not going to be enough for us to push through if we don't have those folks at the table.
Right, and then just building on that as well, if you go to some people and you say, I have this really cool tool, there's a group of people, like the people in this room, who are like, that is awesome, show me the cool tool.
The winch on a sailing system, I need to go into that business.
But there are other people who you need to go to and say, you have a problem, and I want to fix your problem.
Yeah.
And later they don't want to hear about the tool. They just want to know that you can help them with the thing that they already know they're struggling.
Yeah, and they're not an idiot.
They're not an idiot. They know that they have this problem, and you're here to fix the problem. And the fact that the way you're going to fix their problem is to use a cool thing, they don't care. They just want their problem fixed.
Agreed.
So I think that's a way to, but then to do that, you have to have a good understanding of whatever it is, whether it's the law business or academia, or you have to have a good understanding of that in order to be able to talk to people about what they're actually interested in. Because not everybody, for some reason that I don't understand, but not everybody is interested in the cool computers, but they certainly are interested. I'll use an example from academia. If you can go to someone and say, I bet you've been wondering about the way this group makes decisions. And I know you've been writing about that for years.
Yeah.
And I have this different way of thinking about why this group makes decisions this way. They might be interested.
I mean, one of the greatest points of success that was pointed out by Mr. Peters earlier was when he released that magazine and people didn't know the name of it, but they knew the content and the stories within it, right? That's what we have to do. It doesn't matter if it's called artificial intelligence or predictive coding or e-discovery, et cetera. The results, and that is what we have to deliver. And we're raising our game as a company at Ross Intelligence, where we released EVA for free. That's an MVP product. We released it bare bones. People can write what they want in it and come back. And it's been interesting to see the people who get it, some people who don't. But we as a company have been so much better for it because now we know what people actually want in that product, and now we can deliver on that. So that's the kind of attitude I think we have to do, and you have to, dare, to go over. And one thing, there was another question that was asked: how are we going to change things? Some of us in our respective communities have already been doing this, but I'm saying charge again over that hill. Take a few more arrows because that's what's going to happen. But collectively, I think we're on the verge of crossing this chasm over the next 2-3 years, and we can do it.
Dan?
Quick anecdote. At my humble law school, we have a law tech committee because I said so. It consists of a handful of faculty who are interested, and even some evangelists about law tech, administrators who are on the committee because I can make them be on the committee, and no one who's not on the law tech committee gives a shit about legal tech at law school.
Yeah.
From the top to the bottom.
And,
I think it's an illustration.
And you know what? That's the case that I've seen across law schools, in-house law firms, and that's one of the things we have to change. And how do we change that? I don't have the answers, but I know that when I'm in front of a room of all intelligent people like all of you, I can ask that question because I need help figuring that out too. And I think part of that is when you show up even at a law firm that seems like they're doing such innovative things, and then you realize they have no procurement process at all. I mean, these are the challenges that are out there. And, I feel like I've been so blessed to be part of this revolution, and it's been great. But now I feel like I want to give back by even starting these conversations, because the idea that all these young legal tech startups are going to enter into the same problems, that's nuts too. Let's make the world a better place for them, and let's make it better for our clients. The example that Laura mentioned, I love. We are literally living in a time where in law, and it doesn't matter about artificial intelligence. This could even be the simple act of process mapping could get better results in your practice, where clients are getting legal advice that isn't as good as they could receive from that same individual because of the practices they're implementing, and we're not all losing our minds about it. But when Mark mentions he had to go get a surgery that was life-ending, and what did he do? The idea that a doctor would say, well, actually, you know what, this whole robot arm thing, that's crazy. I don't think robots should be in the surgery room. It was too much for me to really find out. And to be honest, like everyone knows, I went into medicine because I don't like math or technology. You wouldn't accept that. And so,
I have to accept that every single day.
Yeah. You have
Sarah does as associate.
Exactly. And but here's the fun thing.
We're a pretty innovative school.
Yeah, and here's the thing. It's not all about, and I think we do us harm by just saying it's all about whatever's the latest and greatest. But that's a great way to catch someone's attention. So the fact that someone wants you to talk about blockchain, what I would say, talk to them about blockchain, and then talk to them about what you can do on an Excel spreadsheet.
Exactly.
In combination with what you can do with blockchain. You see?
Or just a
whatever.
Excel spreadsheet.
Whatever. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Had been compared to medicine. In the medicine, the change came mostly from outside. They were forced. Because during Obama administration, they gave us incentive in the office for the computerized. They gave some few $1,000 if you do this and this. And then they made the quality measure from the doctor. They have the report through computer. And now they are penalizing if you don't computerize. So it was not just market forces, it was for outside forces with partnership.
Yeah, it was outside but still inside because they were the regulators.
Actually, don't be market forces.
Yeah. I think it was still inside in that it was regulated as such. And the thing is we have the regulation already in place. Dan mentioned earlier, ethical obligations, duty to stay competent with the latest technology, duty to, use the latest and best technology if it results in a better overall action for your clients. We have that. So the thing is to just say we need to add the rules, I think, is not necessarily just, we already have rules in place as well.
So talking about the culture, I mean, what the heck?
I'm glad I inspire that attitude. That's what I want.
No, I guess I'll just go ahead. So talking about the culture, if you look, for example, at the ABA, right, or for law schools, the AALS, These are our regulating organizations who are, all kinds of, the ABA is better than the AALS, but there's all kinds of improvements that could be made from their end through just being more serious about data. I mean, forget about, and we don't see that from there, and that's like top-down cultures.
Correct.
If you have a directory of lawyers that still isn't online, you can only get in a book, like what's happening,
Yeah, I totally agree. I think part of that though
That's true. That's a true story.
So what we can do though, is say, well, they don't get it, and that's the way it is, and obviously we all have that frustration. But I think the onus double downs on us to figure out what to do, because, and I know a lot of people in this room have been doing it for quite some time, and you may say, hey, Andrew, you're young, you don't really get it, and maybe I don't get it. Maybe I don't. But saying that means that nothing's ever going to change. And is that what we want in our culture and in law? Is that what we want? Andrew, you don't get it? I've been doing it for 20 years. It just doesn't work that way. Sounds a lot like the people you say don't get you.
Can I just build on what you said, Andrew, about people not necessarily in your Twitter feed? We have to go outside our silos and tie that to regulation. Really, the ABA does not control the model rules of professional conduct. Each and every state Supreme Court does. And some of those state Supreme Courts are more receptive to understanding the profound changes affecting our government and the fact that some of those rules should be considered, in my opinion, changed to support innovation. They're not going to be accessing any Twitter feeds. It is going to our respective state Supreme Courts one by one and sitting down and educating them. And it's a laborious task, but technology, they're not on.
I agree with you completely, and I'll use an anecdote because it also allows me to speak highly of Canada, which I love to do. I'm like the opposite of a Canadian because I'm very vocal about it. But if you look at AI in Canada and that development, our Prime Minister, there's pros and cons to anyone. There's pros and cons to what he does. But one thing is, if you ask about artificial intelligence, and there's tapes online where you can look it up, type in Justin Trudeau explains machine learning. And even if he's reading off a cue card, which I don't think he is, I actually think he understands it. He can describe what it is more or less in a very informed, unique, everyday language, which means you'll really get it. Now, yeah, well, here's the thing. Part of that wasn't just that happening. The Canadian culture around that informed it, and academics sat down with him. He visited institutions. They made sure that he was aware of it, et cetera. So, like you said, it's a lot of work to get to that point. But the ABA or whatever, everyone here knows more about the regulatory framework that has to change than I. I'm just a legal entrepreneur I like neat, new, cool things that help people do their life better. Been doing that since I was a kid. I used to sell lemonade on hot days because I figured people wanted to cool down, right? So this is what I've been doing my whole life. I don't know about that stuff, but what I do know is that in order for us to have an overall, and us to have a successful crossing of this chasm as a community, things have to change.
Leslie?
Sometimes I wonder whether the people that, the students that get attracted to a JD program are the same kind of people that can innovate. I'm not saying,
Sure.
Exactly. I'm just saying, there's a couple things I noticed. For example, the students that get attracted to the JD program tend to be cerebral and careful and thoughtful. And you talked in your presentation about getting stuff out there that isn't perfect, that isn't, just iterating from there. Those things sometimes conflict.
I agree.
And I'm not sure you can take that group of people who find comfort and safety in being thorough and careful and turn them into people who are going to put something out in the world that they know kind of stuff.
I'm not advocating for everyone to become a legal entrepreneur. I'm advocating for us to provide in some way, not at just the law school level, but throughout their career, an ability for them to be able to have a critical mind to try new tools to do their job better, which is if they truly are so thorough, then why aren't they trying these tools out? Because they want to be so much more accurate, right? And here's the other issue is, space travel and rocket science seems pretty complex to me. I don't get it. I know that probably a bunch of fuel ignited I don't know how a car really works either. But I think that that's super important. Rocket science seems important. And Elon Musk put a tape on the internet of, hey, look at all the time that these rockets failed and they cost so much money along what he was doing. And so that has caused a lot of people in that industry to think he's a bit nuts. And I don't think everyone, I actually think he's nuts as well, and I'm an entrepreneur. But I don't need everyone to be an Elon Musk. That's what I'm not saying. And that's why anything in absolutes, everyone should learn how to code. Everyone should, I stay away from that. But I do think we need to foster a culture where they're not penalized for doing something that isn't what they've been taught 20 years ago.
And I would just add one other thing to that with it. It's a little bit, right now, somebody who has an entrepreneurial spirit or who is very interested in computer science might look at law and think, that's not a good field for me.
Yeah.
But as the field changes, people who are entrepreneurial, into computer science, into data, will look at law and say, I can do great things there. So right now, part of what's going on is a pipeline problem.
Yes.
Where we don't have enough people coming into law school who have this skill set. As the culture of the practice changes, I think we're going to see an improvement in that pipeline problem, and then that's going to accelerate the change in the culture.
Can we get a high five
Absolutely.
on that one? Because, and we're going to go to a question, but I want to say something on that. What's the old saying? You become most like the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? And so include in those 5 people someone that you want to change if you can. And it's not going to be easy, but it's something we all have to do. And I think the pipeline problem's huge. And the pipeline problem's also, when I said legal technology sometimes in the past, and it will continue in the future, isn't always the greatest. I think that's been a pipeline problem too, because how do you convince an engineer to come into the legal world when they see all these issues and they're like, why would anyone want to build technology for these people who are behaving and acting in this manner?
Let me just, so that we don't run into time, let me just do this. We'll answer your question.
Yeah.
I'm going to exercise my prerogative as the MC. Why don't we ask Marcus and Laura to please come down and let's continue this conversation.
Yeah, but let's get that
after
question.
we get to that question, yeah.
Well, and actually, I'm going to change a tiny bit what I was going to ask for, say, to address.
You're iterating. You're iterating.
About the law students and who's attracted to law school. I mean, I think I'm a good example. I graduated in 1991, before there really even was legal tech. My friends all thought I was crazy because I left my big firm job after a year and a half to go in with friends of mine at a technology company and become
Marcus and Laura.
both the GC of that company, but also a process consultant. And so I'm a perfect example of someone everyone would have thought was super risk averse, but took huge risks, and that has been great for my career actually as an attorney. But what I was going to initially say is I think it's important to kind of end with your point about solving solutions and process mapping. To me, what would help us bridge the chasm is for regulatory changes, for educational changes that really foster that if you're going to be the managing partner of a law firm, or you're going to be the general counsel of a large corporation, that you have to actually go through process mapping exercises, that you have to understand how your department or your firm really works from a legal process standpoint, because then you would actually understand the problems that you needed technology to help you address. Without having that background in process mapping and understand how people and process tie into technology, you're never going to be the kind of leader of your department or your firm that can jump over the chasm that we're talking about.
I totally agree, and that's why anyone in this room talking about all of us have to take action. Send an email to Eva, ask about if she has programs about process mapping, design thinking. That's the thing. One thing I always say, even at Ross, being CEO is mainly just me trying to problem solve all the time. And what I always hear is, well, it's not so-and-so or that particular group's issue, it's this issue that needs to change or whatnot. And so what I always suggest is that's true, because the regulatory framework is absolutely true. But then what I always ask is, what can you as an individual or your division do that can further that issue as well? So it's like, well, I'm going to send an email to Eva and do that.
So, okay, so this is, let me also introduce Dave Curley. David is with Thomson Reuters. He is a really one of the, I think, outstanding legal thinkers in our field. He runs their technology division, but he's a lot more than just technology, just like our other speakers are. They're what I would call applied technology to solving some of our profession and industries, thank you very much, problems. So let me just fire away. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm just going to throw a couple of questions out, and then by all means we can have the group. So it seems to me that, you know, we keep coming back to culture, which I think is the right place to be. You know, I think that what it should tell us is that the different speakers at the conference come from different geographies, different parts of the legal ecosystem, but nonetheless, there is this convergence on the issue of culture. David, let me start, since you haven't had an opportunity, you've done a lot of listening. What is your take in terms of how we might meaningfully go about changing legal culture? Because as my friend Richard Susskind famously said, you know, how do you tell a group of millionaires that their business model is wrong?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. And I think, you know, this culture theme has been going on for a day and a half now, and we're all thinking about it a lot. And I think it's easy to get frustrated. It's easy to point out the places where it's not working. But maybe one approach is to focus on where it is working, where it is changing, where culture is starting to come around. And I can think of sort of two examples, broadly speaking. Somebody yesterday mentioned CLOC, the Corporate Legal Operations Consortium, which is a place where the aspect of culture that we're talking about the, sort of the diversity of roles, where the industry can let in professionals with other skills other than core legal skills, data analysts, the process managers, process engineers. On that corporate side, there's a culture developing. I mean, if you go to a CLOC conference, which by the way has doubled in attendance every year for 3 years, they just met a couple of weeks ago, 2,000 people attended. You sense a culture emerging there. There is a culture of people who are determined to do their job a different way. And I think that might be the ultimate answer, is that some of that spirit is going to rub off on you know, the sort of the quote mainstream industry, the law firms and the traditional clients. Another place where that culture is kind of coming around is in the alternative legal service provider space. I mean, it's easy to get hung up on when we talk about lawyers and their characteristics. We tend to have this archetype of the law firm lawyer in mind. But there's actually an awful lot of lawyers and allied professionals working in alternative service providers, where they're integrating services and technology in interesting new ways. They're delivering new types of services. So I think there are examples of the culture piece coming together, and I don't think we should lose track of that as we, you know, continue to vent our frustrations with the sort of the mainstream culture.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, thanks. I wanted to ask a question about the pipeline. You know, who's coming into let's call it the industry, okay? With apologies to those who say that it has to be referred to exclusively as a profession, but I'm using the term industry because I think it is broader and will include both, as lawyers have long said, both lawyers and, quote, non-lawyers. And I think that's something, by the way, we should jettison non-lawyers and talk about, you know, legal professionals who may not have licensure as lawyers. So with that as predicate, Marcus, you, I thought, had some great slides in your terrific presentation, one of which captured my imagination was, you know, sort of the personality profile and the sociability. I don't recall what the exact word was. What was it? It wasn't sociability, but oh, it was sociability. Okay. You know, Sarah touched upon this in her comments with you, Andrew, and I know Leslie. You know, you've got the STEM kind of program.
You have these students in the room.
Oh, great. Right. I'm just kind of wondering, to what extent, Marcus, I'll direct this to you, to what extent might we as an industry make very clear that, you know, we are not only receptive to people with, you know, sort of different types of backgrounds, but actually encouraging them because we think that there is a terrific future for them in the profession. I guess, how do we go about, on a broader scale, getting the kinds of students that you select?
I don't know. I was just wondering whether you were thinking about some sort of image ads, like the German army making image ads so that people join the army. I mean, we have, as I said, it's a privilege to work at Bucerius, and we don't have to do any marketing for us, so people come anyway. We look at their social structure and mixture and make sure that everyone has a fair chance to get through this. So we have not given further thought to attracting more people, because people from all parts of the world are coming anyway. But what I can answer is, it's not so much a question of whether we encourage people to come or not, because they will be coming anyway. That's point one. And point two is, there is no way in saying, well, we appreciate this new generation with their skills and values, because they are that type anyway. So whether we like it or not, it's a question of live with them. And at the moment, we are very much in an early stage where traditional lawyers would say, these young guys, they don't really want to work, no partner career, and they don't work hard enough, and they are so different. So the typical teething issues. So if the industry would start to look at their structures and their attractiveness of what they offer men and women and people of all sorts of diverse backgrounds. I mean, and John, you are nodding because you know what it means with 9,000 lawyers to cater for all these different. That is, let's focus on that, and not so much on the image campaign to invite more people to come, because they will be coming anyway. It's still an attractive profession. There are many countries where you get through law school or other types of education without being ruined after that. And you can have a great time in law. So that's my answer to your question.
I'm just going to pose one more question and then throw it up to the audience, and I'm sure there'll be lots of spirited questions. So I'm going to direct this jointly to you, Laura, and to you, Andrew. You know, as people who are part of a younger generation, and I'm just delighted because I can tell you that, you know, when I was at your stage of the game, I did, you know, through improbable circumstances, you know, I was kind of a very young managing partner, and of course, everybody just, you know, just thought, what is this? You know, what is it? Does he have something on someone? Why is he here? Sort of thing, you know? Because when I was a young lawyer, it was, you know, it's sort of like the post office. You know, it's how you are valued is largely based on how many years you put in. And then secondarily, once you get to the partnership, it's all about, you know, how much rain can you make? And that was it. And so the fact that you guys are, you know, a part of, you know, the leadership says to me that maybe the culture is starting to change. I'm wondering what kind of, from your perspective, what kinds of advice might you give to the older generation that would actually get them to say, hey, you know, we can learn a lot from these guys, just as, you know, as they tell their war stories, they like to think, probably inaccurately, that you guys can learn a lot from their war stories. So what is it that you would say, you know, to the older generations that makes it clear that really maybe this is a part of an emerging culture?
I'm going to take great pride in doing this. I actually wouldn't say anything because I don't see us siloed by older generation, younger generation. So, you know, the way that I think the movement of, you know, the law and where a lot of areas are going is what are you doing? And I think the idea that it's like we have to think about that person's older, that person's younger, I think that needs to go away. And so I think the advice that I would give is the same one that I gave earlier, just in general about doing stuff and getting out there. And I'm not just trying to say this to sound like, I don't know, like today I woke up and I had like really strong coffee and I want to be political all the time. But, you know, I just think that that's the way I genuinely think, and we talked about that as well, Mark. One thing that I would say though is, while I love that we talk about age diversity, I also think we need to talk about ethnic diversity in the legal industry and in legal tech, as well as gender diversity. And so I think that that's another topic. And, you know, legal tech is suffering from some of the same problems that law did. And, you know, I saw something, I think it was yesterday, Bob Ambrosi had a tweet about a study that said there's, I think, 13% female legal tech entrepreneurs in terms of founders, something like 3% Hispanic, something like 2% Black. And I think that's a huge issue, and I think we suffered from it as well at our company, where we focus so much on ethnic diversity. I'm brown and Gmo's Black, so it kind of made sense to go that route. And now we've really doubled down on trying to ensure that we hire more folks from various genders, et cetera. But I think we need to have these full conversations. So I'd rather focus on talking about different ethnic backgrounds, different genders, different everything, and us not have these set silos again.
And by the way, I'm totally with you.
Of course.
I'm just saying that, you know, I think that the intergenerational diversity is something that is very often, frankly, overlooked.
Agreed.
And I believe that you're crazy not to have a younger generation on your management.
I just want to say one more thing. I don't think it makes sense to just rely on the young generation of digital natives to do all this change, because they're not the decision makers. So you're telling people who have no decision-making strength at a firm, at a law school, at an in-house team, why don't you guys figure out technology? But that doesn't make any sense. And so that's why you have to be very careful when you use terms digital native or these young generation. That Bucharia study, which was fabulous to see, it's going to take them 20 years to get to decision-making levels. And in that, they're going to have to eat so much fertilizer that they might not be able to actually have the same attitudes. So again, that's kind of what I want to say.
Yeah, and I'd echo that. I don't tend to generally think about it in terms of, you know, younger generation, older generation. That's not typically the way we tend to think about it. And you know, what's always interesting when we're going into firms and they're asking us to, you know, come show them what our technology does, is that we see interest, really strong interest across the board. It's not just people who are, you know, the millennials. You get really senior partners who are, you know, perhaps even the strongest advocates there, because they have a vision for, you know, what's coming in law and how this is going to benefit them. So I think it's not just about, you know, what do you do with your kind of youngsters in the firm. Whoever's in there who's got a sense of what's coming and how we can adapt, and, you know, who's pushing for that change, back that person. Wherever they are in the firm, whether they're the most senior person or the least senior person. I think, so no specific advice for...
Well, and I just make one comment that I guess I've shown sort of my unwitting generational bias, in the sense that, you know, I presupposed that maybe that would be the mindset, but I will say this. I think we are moving towards an era in our industry where it's about expertise. And who has the expertise? Who's got the expertise to solve problems, right? And you know, when law was just about, you know, legal expertise, that was all it is. It just happened that the backstory of why, you know, I was able to have a kind of an uncharacteristically rapid rise is because when I was an assistant U.S. attorney, One of the many cases that I tried was a class action that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Nobody even knew what class actions were, right? So I had the expertise. And I think that now, as law is not just about legal expertise, it's about technological expertise, it's about process expertise. You know, different people have the expertise. And you know, I think that the sooner we as an industry are able to acknowledge that and embrace it for the benefit of not only existing law clients, but those in need of what we can deliver. Marcus, you were talking about, you know, the unfortunate situation of the blowback from, you know, sort of the German bar in terms of, you know, blowing back to steps that could be taken to improve access to justice. I think these are the kinds of things that we, you know, really need to tackle head on. And I think people have to understand that it's now an age of different types of expertise. Just my 2 cents. Okay, let's open it up to the floor. Yes.
Going back to Mr. Harton's presentation, you had surveys where you talked about lawyerly ways, traditional ways of thinking. So the new age lawyers and people who deal with legal issues, how do we overcome that mentality of like skepticism or being like the warriors, like just thinking of everything that goes wrong instead of just building? So that's my question to you. And then Andrew, so process thinking is a buzzword in legal technology. I'm not a fan of it. And as you pointed out, Elon Musk said it's not about the process, it's about the result and what comes out of it, the consequences, right? The end result. So do you think process mapping and design thinking is the way to go?
I can answer that so quick. And then, I mean, I don't think Elon just pours gas into a rocket and lets it go. Elon doesn't just pour gas into a rocket and lets it go. So he and his team think through what happened in the past that worked and why there might be ways to improve, etc. So whatever you want to call planning a thing before you do it, that's what I'm advocating for, and looking at what you currently do. So whether it's design thinking, process mapping, whatever name you want to give it, I think obviously the journey is important, but you do have to think through what the problem is, identify the problem, and how can it be solved, and what are some options to solve it, and then track results. So when he used to look at the like this rocket failed, what did we do here, and how can we change that? That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the basic process that technology companies take with any of their products, right? So we're used to thinking that way.
Yeah.
You do a thing, you find out where it worked, where it didn't work, you correct, you try again, you correct, you try again, and that's how you make it.
Whatever that is what I'm advocating
yeah.
for. Yeah.
Iteration or continuous improvement.
Yeah.
Any of those words work. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe let me pick that up. If I had understood your question correctly, so how do we overcome certain attributes which belong to the older generation? How do we foster or support these new attributes? That was your question, right?
Traditional ways of thinking.
Yeah, it is. You know, the magic is we don't have to do anything because it's just there. These people haven't been trained by us to perform in these surveys in a way that they are less skeptical and less aggressive and less. They are educated by me as a father or by other people of my generation, and these are the people who grow up in a different background, no war behind them, mostly no poverty, no, you know, and they are as they are. And for me, the important part of your question would be, how do we support these traits and attributes in an atmosphere and environment which is basically completely different, which does not cater and does not appraise these personality traits as something which gets a bonus or makes a career or makes it up to partnership, because that's what I call the culture clash between the traditional way of thinking in a partnership and a new ways of people who say, don't know whether you remember my top teams list, on number 2 or 3 was away with partnerships. We want to have a corporate because a corporate stands for more fairness in treating different people. whilst the partnership is this group of mostly men deciding on the next generation, which all of a sudden looks exactly like them. So what I'm saying is, the main challenge is in a law firm, which every law firm has a traditional background, how to change the systems in a law firm to allow for new, diverse cultural backgrounds, people backgrounds, gender backgrounds, ethical backgrounds. That's, we in Germany, we don't talk so much about gender because that has not yet arrived in Germany. We are proud if we get it right with gender diversity. And I would very much like to hear from John, for example, what Denton's does in a firm, if it doesn't just blow up everything, in a firm like Denton's in all corners of the world, and still growing and still organically growing, how your firm is managing to do that. Because if that process is not managed, these people will turn away and will find other employers because they are very good, they are very creative, they have a good sense of humor and a good personality, so it's fun to work with them. So if law does not offer or cater for these personalities, then it's getting pretty dull. So John, how
solve the problems?
Yeah.
Well, it's a very interesting conversation, and I think, the way we're trying to approach it, frankly, is we have a extremely talented chief talent officer who has built out a very robust set of leadership training initiatives that really focus on bringing some of the best thinking in terms of how to build teams, how to bring in neuroscience, behavioral science, and actually help elevate the quality of leadership and management skills that our partners have, as well as other business service leaders to try and address those kinds of issues. And really focus on, I was having this conversation with someone yesterday. To me, one of the most interesting things about my job is when I'm going to different parts of the world where we have meetings in our various locations. It just blows me away the differences and unlocking that. And I think I mentioned yesterday about part of our value is built around being polycentric. If you're going to say that, you have to activate it, and that means you can't impose a single approach to everything that's built on your own cultural grounding. So it's a challenge, and I wouldn't say we have it down perfectly, but there's a pathway that really first acknowledges the problem and comes up with some systematic approaches to trying to elevate our capacity to manage.
That's a great answer. David, you had a comment you wanted to make.
Well, to bring this conversation kind of back to that pipeline problem of how do we bring in the right kinds of students and get them on the path. I mean, there's a combination of carrots and sticks that you could use here, right? I mean, one of the carrots would be to make more well-defined roles that would clearly be of interest to the students coming out of Dan Lima's program, for example, at Michigan State, or any of the other programs like here that are catering to students interested in crossing these disciplines between technology and law. But part of the problem is also just the way we frame the whole enterprise of law and law school. We sort of, these conferences, we spend a lot of time talking about what would scare away a young student, like why would I want to go into that field given its current state? But there are students, I think, that would look at that and say, wow, what a challenge. Look, there's an industry that's a real mess, and my skills can fix this.
Right.
And so somehow we need to make a bridge to those students that will see it as an advantage of the current state.
And I also think it's important, and John mentioned this in his presentation, being risk adverse is not a bad thing.
either. And I don't think all of a sudden we have to throw out everything that made a lawyer as well. So we have to issue spot, et cetera. So I just think that it's, instead of thinking, well, if I am this way, I can't be any other way, that needs to go out the door. And I was an attorney, but I was an entrepreneur, and I'm both. So it's it is what it is. So I just think we also have to be careful, not just, like I said, just grabbing the stuff around us and running out the door really quick. Now everyone's going to be an entrepreneur. No, let's plan it through. And I think, yes, in high doses, it's negative, but we also have to approach our work, and what makes a lawyer a trustworthy person who people go to solve their issues is their legal training, their problem solving, and their experience, and that's all very important.
Yeah, I just wanted to, go ahead, Laura, please, first.
So we recently did quite an interesting thing, which is we had one of our clients, an associate from one of our clients, come do a secondment with us at Diligent. And so he was working with us for a while, and he made a lot of observations about what was different about the law firm environment to the technology company environment. And one of his comments was definitely around that he was so surprised to see that, when we sat down as a team to make a decision, there were like a few lawyers there, but there were also software engineers, machine learning engineers, there were business people, there were marketing people, and we all sat down and said, what problem are you facing? And we all tried to solve the problem, even if it wasn't our area, and especially if it wasn't our area. And that actually leads to some surprising solutions. I've had, business and marketing problems solved by software engineers, because sometimes there is a technological solution that you just don't know exists, right? And that's where, and that's something I really love about our company. And it's not that you need to take the lawyerliness out of the lawyers. It's just, as soon as you get a group together that has different skill sets, different viewpoints, different expertise, you get a stronger solution overall, right?
I think that's a great point. And to that, to put it, maybe even an exclamation point on that great point, I think that David had mentioned clock, and that's come up during the course of this conference. And the interesting thing though is that if you look past all the enthusiasm and you look past the buzz of corporate legal operations and you look at what's really going on and what kind of influence they have within most legal departments, you will see that it's quite limited. And I think that is the culture issue again. And to your point, Laura, I totally agree with you that I think where clients' interests will be advanced the most thoroughly and quickly is those organizations that do what your organization does, which of course is very different, because in many law firms, let's be honest about it, technologists are sort of the redheaded stepchildren within the organization. Legal ops people, to the extent that they exist, are tolerated, and they're more window dressing than they are in most firms, truly an integral part of the decision-making process of how best to deliver. And with that, in terms of the structure and the partnership structure versus the corporate structure, I'd like to just pose a question to you, David, on this one. We haven't talked much about so-called alternative legal providers. I think we could come up with a much better name for them because they're no longer alternative, they are very mainstream. Most of those organizations have the kind of composition, Laura, that you are talking about. They have legal expertise, but they also have other forms of expertise required. And they also have corporate structures. So I'm wondering, David, if you could just talk a little bit about your thoughts on these kinds of providers. And they also have different reward systems, right? You can have stock, you can have outside investment, and so on and so forth. If you could just comment on that a little, and how you see that sort of in the bigger picture discussion that we're talking about.
Sure, and I think that's key, because we continue to sort of talk about law firms as the paradigm for the legal industry or the legal practice, and as we speak, it's moving away from that. We're moving away from a law firm-centric industry to a much more multimodal industry, if you will, where corporate GCs and their organizations are taking on more power and more operations, and alternative providers as well. Marcus was nice enough to throw up a slide from that study we did 2 years ago, and we're currently fielding an update to it about alternative legal service providers. And I think really the truly interesting finding that we came up with out of that study was that in the course of a few years, the buyers of those services, whether they're corporations or in some cases law firms themselves, are increasingly seeing the purchase of those services as an added value rather than just a cost reduction method. You know, when outsourcing firms first came along, it was all about shipping labor to a cheaper labor market. But increasingly, the combination of those providers using technology, using cheaper humans, and using different sets of skills to solve legal problems has turned them into a value, to the point where even law firms say, okay, there are certain classes of matters that we can't keep the expertise around on a full-time basis to cover. But we have good relationships with alternative providers, and we can bring that work to those people, and that adds value to our clients.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big dynamic that's going on here, is that we're not just shifting dollars around, we're sort of shifting the whole value proposition around a little bit.
Yeah, and to that I would just say that it seems to me that we're undergoing a shift now where traditional notions of what a law firm was as this self-contained entity that did everything on its own, now they're starting to collaborate. You see one example would be Allen and Overy, the famous firm, Magic Circle firm, has collaborated with Deloitte. And you see instances where you have vast swaths of an in-house legal department. Recently, General Electric sent about 200 of its legal department over to a so-called alternative service provider. I prefer to use the term law company, United Lex. United Lex took over a vast portion of General Electric's law department, and I'm not speaking out of school here, but it's going so well that even more of the General Electric law department might well be going over to United Lex. So I think that the traditional notions of sort of the marketplace are starting to shift, and my personal hope is that that is emblematic of the kind of cultural shift that we're all talking about during this conference, and hope will continue. More questions from the audience? Yeah.
For about 30 years, medical informatics has been talking about cultural change on the physician side, false prophets about what's going to be the next killer app, and something I'll call small victories. And at least in my view, the small victories have been the driver for the culture, and it's gone the other way, not from the culture down, it's gone from the small victories up. So let me ask a question which we can come back next year and decide Ross was wrong and Diligent was wrong, but what do you think the next small victories are that are going to push the culture forward?
The funny thing is that we hear all the time that law firms are slow to change and don't want to adopt technology, and we see it from a very different perspective. All day, every day, I deal with firms and legal departments who very much want to change and are very interested in adopting technology. And, and all of those, I would say, is not just small victories. Each of those is a big victory, because each time one company changes, it influences all of the others. That influences their clients. There's a knock-on effect, and so I'd say we've got more than small victories, and have for some time. Andrew, do you want to?
Yeah, I think
I think what I'm noticing is very much the same. I think being able to be the first portfolio company that got to work with Next Law Labs and a whole bunch of amazing things that, going through Y Combinator, et cetera, and gaining a lot of some of the best law firms in the world, in-house teams, et cetera, has been fabulous. But I think the small victories are still, and I'm not saying that, I still think we're making a lot more small victories, so maybe this is a different point, Laura, from what you're saying. What I'm saying is that when you work with a large organization, you don't work with all 9,000 lawyers at Dentons. You work with the pocket and the innovators. And if you work with a law school, if you work with an in-house team, you deal with, like you mentioned earlier, those people who are driving the change. So I think those are the small victories, because the large victories is going to be when every single lawyer at, name the top AmLaw 100, know about tools like Diligent, know about tools like Ross. And I'm talking about from the bottom up. That would be a large change. But I think the small victories are occurring on a daily basis. And obviously we work to publicize that as much as we can so that you do have a movement where folks know that it's okay to innovate and okay to change. But I don't see as much as you'd want, and Dan mentioned his frustrations just from an academic standpoint, and I think this is the same in all of our different institutions. We know who within our organizations are open to these things and we work with them. That's a small victory. I see the future being us working with everyone at an organization, and that's what we look forward to as an organization. Our goal, as I always say, is we want Ross to be on the legal team of every lawyer in the world. And that's going to obviously come with a lot of scrapes and bruises and scars. And good thing that I'm young, but I'm getting a lot more gray hair, so we'll see how it goes.
Just wait. Let's take about 10 more minutes. We've got a few questions left. I think, probably it's Friday. I know we have a number of people from out of town who are trying to catch flights, so, and it's almost lunchtime. So how about if we take a couple more questions? And yes.
To a position to do the decision making. But what about now? The question is how we position ourselves at this moment.
Marcus, you want to take a shot?
No, I was not sure I really have understood the question.
Yeah. So is your question that, given the fact that you are in this program that embraces your background in STEM and whatnot, and now that you're going to be finished and going in the marketplace, are you going to have to wait 20 years for market acceptance? Is that your question?
Yes, kind of like how we position ourselves.
Right.
In the challenge of all the expertise.
Okay. So Marcus, I guess I'd frame it as, from a personal branding perspective, what counsel might you be able to give to this young woman and others like her who, are going through these innovative programs, but they're sort of like the first in the market to do this. And the market may not quite yet understand the full value of what it is that they can bring to the table.
I would recommend shop around. And don't take the first offer you get. Or even if you may think, oh wow, that'll take a quarterback from my debt. That's probably not the best offer you have. The issue is, and that's what I understand as the background of your question, we have on the one hand a high level of activity and innovation and all that stuff, and on the other hand a great degree of intransparency. So we don't really know who the innovative firms are, where people like you are really welcome. We know who works with Ross because it's on your homepage, but for other people it's hard to identify where to go. So what we probably need is a sort of database or data collection on law firms where young innovative people could go to. These are probably not the usual suspects of the big law firms which offer you a fixed career path and a decent salary. for Germany, I would expect look around in smaller firms, and you will have maybe you'll find there what you're looking for. And what we tell our Bucerio students very often is look outside law firms, not in-house departments, but look outside law firms. And there is a significant percentage of Bucerio's students who set up their own startup firm, either as a technology firm or as an alternative law firm, trying to combine new ways of providing legal services. But there is no list of firms I could give to you and say, look, there are the phone numbers, try to phone them. I'm sorry, it's really shop around and look around.
Yeah, and I would just, to put a gloss on what Marcus said, or to repeat what he said, is don't just limit yourself to the traditional paradigm of a law firm or even an in-house department. That some of these law companies, for example, I think might be my response to where you might want to look.
Or smaller startups, or larger, legacy companies are always looking for people. So
Thomson Reuters has a job for you. That was aren't you glad you
what
asked?
I'm trying to say is,
you get a job. You get a job. Everybody gets a job.
It's a big tent, and I think again I want to emphasize the whole. One important thing to take away from all this is to not think of the legal services industry as being the law firm industry. It's not the same thing.
Right.
There's a lot of different types of players. We're all active in this. We're all interested in new kinds of talent. So definitely.
If you work for Ross, you get a shirt.
Yeah, he's got that.
The best T-shirts. I would say if you're looking at firms or more traditional outfits, when you see the headlines and those different groups, that's great. Those are a great jump-off point. But when you're going through the interview process, ask them questions about what they are actually doing in those programs. Yeah. And the same would apply to even I tell high school students that about law schools, etc. Be like, okay, name 3 of the last projects you went through and let me know how did that get rolled out to the firm, etc., etc. And ask those questions because A, it's going to make you seem like you're informed, and also just you'll get the right information so you don't just wind up kind of back at square one, which you don't want to.
Yeah, and I think maybe that would, your question, because you are the future, and I think that maybe that's a great way to kind of end up on the future, right? Not what was, but what's going to be. So I just want to thank the law school, the dean. I'd like to thank Julian, give a shout out to Julian and to her team who have done a great job putting on this program. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for attending. I hope you felt that it was time well spent. At the very least, you got some free meals, and and you had the opportunity to meet some of really the leaders in the industry, the leaders and doers. And most of all, I would like to thank the speakers, who are all my friends, and I don't use that term lightly. They are colleagues and they are friends. Each one of them, has one or more day jobs. They have traveled, in some instances, most instances, from a great distance to join us. I think you will agree with me that, it was just a great opportunity to spend time with them, to hear their thoughts. So thank you all very much for doing this. And I hope we get to do it again. So.
And a round of applause for Mark. He kept it going. So.